have an independent viewpoint, a great wry sense of humor, and you brought ambitious objectives for district success. Privately and personally, you continue to work on campus beautification. It's not just the 2014 capital projects that have made our campus more beautiful, but your hands-on shovel work and beautiful plantings, so thank you so much for that. During your tenure, the district was voted Best of Westchester for 3 consecutive years, an honor also bestowed to a local weather website, Weather in the HUD, that I believe your son helped co-found. You served as president of the board last year, and that was a year filled with accomplishments. A few highlights include the successful and popular approval of a responsible budget, the completion of capital projects, and the hiring of our very talented assistant superintendent of business and the director of PPS.
Don't forget the strategic plan.
And you were critical from the day one in helping develop the strategic plan, which we heard in many of our presentations in relation to our goals and our budget planning. Last year, you had the rare opportunity to give a speech as president at your own son's graduation, which must have been a very special moment. And you leave us after an efficient, successful term on the board. And so we will miss you. And in honor of your service, we have a special recognition. You have to remind me whether she gets to keep this or we take it back from her. We take it back, because we're going to keep this here.
Good God.
Like Catherine Palmieri, Board of Education. I think we can just leave this as a right here tonight. Oh. And you get to keep this wonderful memento.
It's a copy.
But more importantly, I'm sure you'll be back with your shovel to also take a look at the brick from time to time. So thank you for taking on the significant.
You know what they say about educators and a brick in the wall.
What do they say?
You don't know the song?
I
Just
do.
another brick in the wall.
And it's not a nice, I'd like to not associate that.
Teacher, leave those kids alone.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Carol has a few things to add.
So this would normally be Chris, but I'm getting the honor of doing this tonight. The Westchester Putnam School Boards Association also has 2 certificates, one for Catherine, and I believe this is for completing your term, and also one for Michael, and dare I say surviving, no, completing your term, so here
Congratulations.
you go for those.
Thank you.
There you go.
That's from the
So Catherine, thank you for taking on this significant volunteer responsibility. I hope that you will enjoy the many hours you are gaining back in each week, and will be able to spend it with, and day, to spend it with your family and activities that make you happy.
Well, thank you, and I want to say it's been quite an honor to serve with such an esteemed group of colleagues. I respect each and every one of you for what you bring to the table, and I've appreciated getting to know all of you over the last few years. It's been a great experience, and I'm grateful for it. I'm happy to say that I'm not completely leaving you, because I did take on the Spirit Wear chairmanship for the PTSA.
That might be even more work.
And I'm combining it with the Booster Club activities, so hopefully we'll see some more school spirit, which is, you know, the next thing that I think will be fun to take on. So, gone but not gone for good, sorry to report.
Start going to the gym now. Those boxes of Spiritware are quite heavy.
I already have them sitting in my office, but we're intending to do some more exciting things that would be, for instance, one of the things that's going on right at the moment is a graphic designer is working on some spiritware that will be soccer uniforms and soccer spiritware in the spirit of the World Cup, so resonating some of those designs in a bulldog fashion.
Fun. Looking forward to seeing that and pulling out my wallet.
Should be exciting. All right, so that's it, but thank you again for all these gifts, and thank you for this lovely brick. And
You have to give it back
I have to give it
But
back
not
to
yet.
you.
Why don't you enjoy it?
for tonight.
And then,
Thank you, though.
so, thank you. And with that, we are back to our regular business, which is, in this case, Dr. Kaur will be sharing with us tonight her work with Dr. Harrison and administrators in developing a program assessment model. What's that?
Are we at that already?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot to mention, because obviously, presence at our meeting, Dr. Harrison is not here tonight. He has never missed a meeting before, but he lost a loved one, a family member, and so was with family today, and so that's why he's not able to be here with us tonight. So we miss Dr. Harrison, and I guess we'll see him at the reorg.
Indeed.
Thank you for the reminder.
So tonight, we'll spend a little bit of time, being a work session, talking about program assessment. I know that you also have on the agenda, and somewhere there's a backup for the performance report, so there might be some conversation around the performance report. But the main focal point of tonight is how will we know, and our program assessment model. So I think that with some of your pushing and prodding, as well as some of our own beliefs, it's a nice combination. I'm going to make them equal for the moment. We really have started to think about that question, how do we know? And we started the year by sharing that at our administrative retreat back in August, we started that conversation with our building administrators. And obviously, forever, we've been assessing kids. It's not like we weren't assessing and now we said, oh, okay, well, let's start assessing. We've been assessing, but I think the question is, how do we assess, and how do we use that assessment data to inform our thinking, our instruction, and our decision-making? And I think that's really been like at the heart of a lot of the questions behind it, which is how do you support, make decisions, know if those were the right decisions, and shift your decisions when they're not the right ones, and build on your decisions when they are the right ones. So we're actually pretty excited, and I really would say thank you to Michael. Michael early on had shared some really good resources that I know both Chris and I used and found helpful. Obviously, we then went and found other resources to ultimately come up with a model that we think will support the work here in Irvington. One of the things that I think is worth noting is any time that we set out to do something of this nature, we need to be thoughtful of how is this going to become part of the culture, part of the practice, and part of the system. So I think you've probably heard me say, and maybe you're sick of hearing me say, trust me, give me time, but I'm a systems person, and systems don't get put into place in a year, and they don't get put into place in 2 years. Culture starts to shift, practice starts to change, and all of a sudden, things that people were questioning just exist. They're just there. So tonight, I'm excited to actually share with you, and I'm sorry that Chris isn't here, because he was excited as well, to share with you a model that we are going to use both backwards and forwards. And I'll talk a little bit about how we are going to go back to some of the initiatives that we've implemented in the last few years, as well as how we're going to use this model going forward. So we like to start every presentation that we do just with that reminder of our mission, our goals, the work, the vision, how we're going to get there, how we see the growth of Irvington School District going forward. So this whole idea, and I think these are really important because I think they're not only important for me and Carol and Chris, but for the board as well, to really say every time we do something, are we meeting those goals? I think the example that I actually feel most often and have in all my years here in Irvington is that we tend to be a conservative place. We're a little risk averse. We're not that comfortable with taking chances. I have colleagues and they try new things and they go and they fly a little bit, and sometimes they land and they fall, and sometimes a wing falls off, but they fly. But that has not always been the culture here. I think we're trying to change that, and we're trying to say if we want to be out in the front of things, and if we want to grow, we have to experience risk. We have to experience failure. It's actually one of our beliefs for kids, that for kids, it's important to experience failure. It's important to experience challenge. So when I look at number 2, encourage innovation, creativity, risk-taking to inspire dynamic learning environments, sometimes we try things out and maybe they didn't work out. What our goal now is to have a good enough system going in that you feel confident that even if we're not necessarily 100% sure that this is a winner, we know we have a good system and process going in that guarantees that at least we're going to be considering how we're going to accomplish our goal and how we're going to measure our goal. So it feels like those two things need to live together. It's not enough to take the risks. You still have to have the measures on the other side to determine if that risk was worth it and if you want to continue to grow with that or if you want to shift gears. So the vision and having a way to get there is really important. Our overarching goals for this year, and you heard them through the lens of our building administrators in these past meetings, implement instructional practices that elevate student thinking. So we are expecting and we are looking for different experiences in our classrooms. And that goal has been in play now for several years. This year, we added to that with the develop a balanced assessment system that measures students' knowledge, skill, dispositional thinking, which is an ongoing goal. Some of our building administrators shared with you actually how they did that work at the building level, how they might have used a faculty meeting to even unpack the definition of balanced assessment. So what I would say is just because we're educators, it doesn't mean we have common understanding of language. I mean, I would say that invariably I could say something one way, Chris could say it another way, teachers another way, and we're not always sure that we're on the same page. So developing that definition of balanced assessment for us was really important. And then the last piece, which is the use of data to inform instruction. I also would hope that you walked away from our building administrators' presentations and seeing that more and more data is being used to inform our practices, that we're implementing programs that demand that data is being used. Are we perfect? No. Are we using every ounce of data that we possibly could? Well, probably not. But the goal is to continue to build our capacity to do that, and the capacity of our teachers, capacity of our administrators, as well as the system in and of itself. So in terms of using data, I know we had shared that one of the things we did this year was the instructional leaders all took on a data project. And when I say personal, like they weren't measuring like how much food they're eating at home. It was personal in that they were taking something that I told them right from the get-go, this isn't going to be up on a screen, this isn't public, but you need to get into the practice of looking at data and understanding how data can inform. So we had instructional leaders, and when I say instructional leaders, just so we're all on the same page, I'm referring to our K-8 team leaders, grade level chairs. We call them grade level chairs K-5, team leaders 6-8, and then our department chairs. Collectively, we call them instructional leaders, and that term also includes all of our building administrators, as well as myself and Chris. So when we have an instructional leader meeting once a month, that is who's included in that meeting.
How many people is that approximately?
Well, I would say so it's 6 and 9, maybe another 7, then about 20, I guess, maybe. Yeah, about 20, maybe 22. And so the goal this year was to get everybody just a little bit more comfortable with thinking about data and starting to ask those questions and then answer those questions for themselves and for each other. So our instructional leaders worked in either pairs or triads, and they shared their data. They did something that was close to their heart in terms of professionally. So we had some that looked at AP scores and Regents data. We have some people that looked at Ames Web data in relationship to Fonsis and Pinnell data. So what we're trying to do is, which is ultimately the goal, is figure out how do we collect our data, how do we triangulate our data so that we're not highlighting for you one data point and saying this is what it is, because it's never going to be that. We also want to ensure that we're starting to plan for both quantitative and qualitative data, because the reality is we're in the people business here. And so I can give you numbers all day long, but in the end, our kids are not widgets, and they change, and cohorts change, and kids change over time. Teachers change, new teachers, old teachers. I don't mean old in age. That's not something I'm allowed to say as the HR person. Experienced teachers. And so it's always important to ensure that that qualitative piece and that longitudinal piece becomes part of the conversation. So in terms of assessing our progress, we're looking to ensure that we have effective measurement, so that's a word that you're going to continue to hear us say. So we may make some decisions about data and collecting data, and then we find out it is an effective measure, it's not an effective measure. How do we know? So early on, right in the beginning of the school year, we shared with you our belief in balanced assessment, and we shared with you this, what we would call our working definition about what we want to make sure assessment looks like in the Irvington School District. That's both in terms of the kind of assessment, the range of assessment, as well as the systemic implementation of assessment.
Can we just go back? I have a quick
Sure.
question. 'Cause I tend to think of this as there's two types of assessment we're talking about. One, which is the focus of tonight, which is program, but then there's the actual assessment of the students themselves, and they're related, but they're not the same.
Right, I would agree. I would say they have a relationship, right? So if we're looking at how do we really assess a program if we ultimately don't look at it through the lens of our students? So it's always connected, but I would say, right, so our daily assessment or our weekly assessment or monthly is our formative or summative. It's what teachers are doing. But this data that we're beginning to look at and talk about is more programmatic assessment. And I know that, well, I'll talk a little bit more about program and how we define what program actually is. And let me just say it right now, no simple answer. It's just not clean. It's not easily defined because people use it differently. And interchangeably, I guess would be the word. So how do we know? So the district vision on measuring success continues to grow. The journey includes multiple efforts, including the evolution of the State of Performance Report, increased focus on data, as I just talked about, and the development and implementation of our model. So in looking at standardized assessment as one measure of growth, one of the things that, and I'll share some slides of our actual data, but the pieces that I think that we've put in place and that we're doing pretty consistently in some cases now is our instructional coaches have become an integral part of making sure that that data is pushed to the forefront and put in front of teachers. So one of the things that we know moving forward into next year we want to have is somebody who's helping us to pull data, run reports, give us the kind of data that we need to analyze it. But in the end, the analysis has to be in the hands of the teachers because they're the ones who ultimately are going to make use of that data. So in the absence of having somebody at that higher level and pulling some numbers, also in the absence of those numbers, although now we have more, our instructional coaches have really led the way in terms of pulling data, looking at questions on the test, using those questions to understand where our kids did well, where our kids struggle, and what should be our area of focus. We're always a little cautious when it comes to the state assessment, and you've heard me say it a million times. You know, New York State, they're a little tricky. They change the questions. They shift. They sort of move the target on us at times. The assessments themselves are not always the most valuable or valid to us in terms of what they ask of kids. But if we put all that aside, if we still use that data over time, there's still value in looking at that data, but it needs to be part of a data set. It can't be the data alone from the state assessment. So our instructional coaches have pulled the data. They work with the teachers. I mean, I think our easiest examples are always the work of math at the elementary level, and we use it often because it's easy to capture, which is they look, they see how the kids did in a certain grade, they come back, they target what they're going to focus on, where we had a deficit the year before, and they try to increase that that proficiency for our students. So each year we look at our standardized assessments, which include the New York State assessment, the Regents exams, and the AP exams. So when you look at our exams, we try and look at our cohorts over time. We try and consider, sometimes the reality is the results are cohort driven, and you could track a cohort from year to year and you see the level of performance, both high and low. I'm not saying it's one or the other. So we try to look at ourselves against ourselves from one year to the next, and then we also look at ourselves compared to the performance of our like schools, which you all know what that data set is in terms of the schools that we'd like to compare to. So each year we examine, we get the scores back, we examine the results. One of the advantages, I would say, is with the Regents, we still score our own Regents, unlike the New York State assessment. So some people used to argue that by scoring your own New York State assessment, which we now have not done in years, the teachers got to see the assessments. They got to see, they didn't score their own students' tests, but they got to see how Irvington kids performed. They got to see the actual writing. They got to analyze it. We don't do that anymore, but at the Regents level, we do. So a lot of what goes on for our teachers at the high school level actually happens during the scoring process, where they're talking about the questions, they're talking about the performance of the kids. So it does play out a little bit differently. We walk away on Friday when we leave, all of the teachers know, they know what their scores are, they have their APPR score already, whereas at K-8, we don't have any of our scores back yet. So it definitely, the analysis looks a little bit different. When New York State, when the elementary teachers put, or not elementary, K-8, put those teachers in boxes, those boxes go out, and that's kind of the end of it. So we live through the day, and then until we get that data back and our instructional coaches start to pull sample questions, the teachers have not seen that information since they administered the test. So if you think about that, if I'm a high school teacher, I'm seeing the results of that test the next day practically. If I'm at the elementary level, I administered the test in April or May, I'm definitely not seeing it until at the earliest September. So I just say that to give you context of how the different levels are different when it comes to looking at the standardized tests and examining. So this just shows ELA proficient and advanced, and it shows you over the years. You know, one of the things you notice there is that the cut points changed. We all know, this wasn't just us, regionally, we saw a dramatic drop in numbers that when they changed the cut points. These are really hard to see, but these are the comparisons. So we compared the cohort of Westchester schools, and you can see, the where we fall in any given year. I would say, just bear with me. In any given year, we sort of move. We move, you know, within a range, and math, yeah. And so I don't know if you can see it or not, but you can see that Irvington sits in that fourth slot there. You can see that the purple, the top box, shows the level 4, level 3, level 2, and level 1. You know, one of the things that we've talked about is when we look longitudinally, our students tend to perform lower in 3rd grade, and then miraculously in 4th grade, they tend to perform at a higher level. We've talked about first-time testing, and that there's no question that plays a role in it. I also think that the 4th grade teachers know as the students are coming in, there's a different level of preparedness because you can start preparing kids earlier in 4th grade. In 3rd grade, the kids don't even they have no context for what that assessment is going to be come May. And quite honestly, and this is obviously my personal opinion, I would hate for us to spend our time with 3rd graders making that the primary focus, considering we see that they perform in subsequent years. So if we saw that our 3rd graders actually didn't perform in subsequent years, I would be saying something different. But we consistently see that they perform better in 4th grade, which tells us there's something about 3rd grade, and I don't know, maybe it's that they're 8. And that's a good thing. So you can see here's the historical look at where Irvington performs over time.
The class of 2021.
And this is the class of 2021.
So this is actually an interesting slide in that it allows us to see where the issue is really the test, because if all the schools drop at the same time, then it's likely the test changes in the test, whereas if there are variances in performance year over year, it's easy to see what is associated with the Irvington cohort performance versus what is test related. That's how I interpret.
Yeah, I would agree. I think both. I think that's definitely true what you're saying, Catherine. I also think, though, that when you're looking at a historical view of a given class, I think that sometimes it is still a cohort. And so where that cohort falls amongst our neighboring districts is still where they may fall within that district. But I would agree. You know, look, I think what we know, for any of us who have like sort of immersed ourselves in any kind of data, we know, you know, there's lots of different ways to look at data, there's lots of ways to make sense of it. In the end, I think that in my own experience, when I say that in my own work, my own research and my dissertation, you know, you can go with it in a lot of ways, and I think the bigger question is, what's our intent? What do we want to know? What do we care about as a school district? And how do we make sure that the things that we care about are the things that we're paying attention to? And that is, you know, that once you can come to that decision, well, then we may be looking at it very differently than our neighboring district, but that's okay because we've decided what's important to us. So here are the Regents results. So this was just a summary. And I could stop here maybe for a minute and talk a little bit about the Regents, but also talk about this question about the 5 mandated Regents, and because I know that came up as a question. So right now, the intent is for us to be able, in the fall, to be able to present to the board the recommendation that for the 1920 school year, that we would shift to the 5 mandated Regents. I think that really what we've learned, and I think many of you now know it who've gone through the process, you know, the reality is New York State is the only state that has Regents. Colleges don't care about the Regents. New York State cares, so we have to care a little bit, but we certainly don't have to care and just offer endless numbers of Regents exams. The other thing that I would say, and you've probably heard this from your own child or from open house, what happens when you have a Regents, it becomes the driving force behind the class, and I get it. So if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching a Regents class, it matters then. Once you're saying to me that we're going to have those Regents courses, then I'm going to give it, and I want my kids to do well on the Regents. Whether they do or they don't, we can debate, but that feels. So now we have teachers saying, well, this question's on the Regents, or this is going to be on the Regents. So that becomes the focus of the class. But if we're really committed to having a curriculum that really thinks deeply about knowledge and skill and thinking, then I would say we don't really want the Regents to be dictating what we do as a district. So we'll always have to have them, but they don't have to sit front and center as they do now. Certainly, when I compare us to many of our other school districts that we like to compare ourselves to, I would say most have have gone to the 5 mandated many years ago, not last year, not the year before, not even the year before that. So that's what I mean. That's a good example of when I started earlier and I said, so who do we want to be? I would wonder if 6 years ago, if that would have been something that would have felt comfortable. But things have changed. The AP exams have changed. So I think now it's almost, I think, incumbent upon us to really look deeply and say, is this what we want? Do we want to have those Regents driving our programs and our curriculum? So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about it, and we will be prepared in the fall to come to you to say, you know, here's really how it would work. There's a couple of moving parts around it in terms of what we have to offer and the Regents kids have to take. So in the fall, we'll provide a presentation that really lays this out with all of the parameters so that you're clear on what we have to provide and where we have some wiggle room and what we want to make sure we don't not have for kids. So we'll talk more about that, but our goal right now would be, and that is partly in aligned with hopefully the rollout of the new master schedule, because we want, if teachers are going to be redesigning courses, there's no point in having somebody spending time redesigning a course that's going to be a Regents course that maybe we're not going to offer if we waited yet another year after that. So that's sort of just a little bit of background and the direction that we're going in for the Regents.
Can I jump in just for
Sure.
one comment, just because I was the one that raised it in case it's not entirely clear. So we now today offer an advanced Regents diploma, which requires us to offer additional Regents above a Regents diploma. So we'll still offer a Regents diploma,
That's
but
right.
we're looking to eliminate those extra courses.
That's right.
And from what I understood in asking the question yesterday,
is that while we offer the Advanced Regents Diploma, it really offers nothing additional to our students. And in fact, they don't even know they get it, except for the fact that it would be a sticker on their diploma, and it's not used in college applications.
SUNY schools.
Is it even
Pardon?
a sticker on the
SUNY
diploma?
schools, but even the SUNY schools, from what I understand, our neighboring high-performing school districts have
Basically
called
give it
SUNY schools, and the SUNY schools said, we know who you are. The
Exactly.
Regents, Advanced Regents Diploma doesn't really offer very much. So my understanding was it's us and Hastings that is left offering this diploma, and Hastings is going to eliminate it. The last class will be 2020. So if we're 2019, that's even better.
Hey.
Love it.
We've
So
got
actually,
2020
I'm thrilled,
students.
and I'll look forward to the presentation.
Good.
I will have to agree, this is a great move. You know, I was reading just today how to pass the Regents, that they downgraded it. Now all you have to do to get a passing grade, I think on algebra is 26, correct? I mean, it's crazy. So I think it's less and less meaningful with every passing year, so I applaud this.
And for those who don't have high school students, the other part is that the kids are very anxious about the exam, so you will, as a parent, spend an extra $200 when they beg you to take a Regents review course, which not everybody can afford, nor are we supportive of, but it's an anxiety-producing
No question.
time.
I'll certainly add that it's a very exciting idea to move away from that, to build that consistency across K through 8 in terms
Yeah.
of building project-based learning type design.
Exactly.
But, I do, just to, we do need to pay attention then to, what's going to fill that space for a lot of high school teachers. Because when you're teaching a Regents course, like you said, Raina, right, your focus is on this prep, which it shouldn't be, right, which I hear you saying as well, which is great, but then what's going to happen in the classroom? Something for
We're
us
still
to-
offering chemistry
No,
as
correct.
an example.
That's
Maybe
correct,
that's
but if I'm
not
not
the
doing,
Regents we're
but if
offering.
I'm not prepping for a Regents exam, my instruction looks infinitely different.
It looks like the next-gen science standards, hopefully,
That's correct.
right?
In-
That's the goal.
Infinitely different.
That's the
Right.
goal.
I mean, you have more flexibility in what units you want to teach.
That's right.
How you want to explore things. You don't have to spend the last 3 weeks preparing for the
That's true.
Regents. There's lots of changes.
Lots of work to do.
Right.
I
Lots
would
of
hope-
good.
And I would hope that teachers would welcome this. I mean, I would.
I think teachers will really welcome it. I will say, I think in theory, some may welcome it more than once it hits, for exactly what David's saying, that it's gonna require some real redesign, but we're right, it's such perfect timing for that I think, actually, while I've complained about these next-gen science standards and how long they took to roll out, actually, it turns out the timing is perfect. Because we'll be rolling out, next year we'll be continue to build our capacity around those next-gen standards, continue to build units, so now if I'm a teacher and I know I'm not gonna have to ultimately have that Regents at the end. So there's some work to do on this, so I don't wanna make it sound like it's easy. There's lots of things, we have to make decisions. So here's what, we're gonna have to make decisions about what Regents we're gonna offer. We're gonna have to talk about if kids wanna take a Regents even if we don't offer the course. So there's a lot that we'll talk about in the fall because it's not as simple as, okay, here, let's go. There's a lot of moving parts to this, and there's decisions to make, and there's also the question about what New York State will accept as a Regents credit. So actually, Dave said to me yesterday, that in looking, he believes that the 8th grade algebra will count for New York, for high school credit for a Regents course. I've heard something different, so there's a lot of moving parts on this. So there's just more to come, but yeah, we're excited. We're excited.
Looking forward to it.
Yep. So AP exams, you'll see a little later, or maybe it was in the performance report, there's a slide. We continue to increase our AP courses, and we could have a whole conversation about that on a separate night. But, I used to love when we showed the slide that started actually back in 2001 or 2000, when we showed we had one AP course. So that was always such a funny slide to me. It was, I think, my first or second year here in district. So we're up to about 21 courses. Dave Cohn has done a really nice job of really looking at how you provide these AP courses for kids, but you also understand that there's a limit to how much a kid can take in 1 year. So rotating courses, AP theory versus theory, so there's a lot of different pieces to offering this many AP courses. We've consistently, we have kids in AP Lit, AP Lang, that sometimes flip-flops from 1 year to the next in terms of our numbers. Again, U.S. history, world history is a good example. Our numbers always look good in world history. It's really our honors level. It's really honors for that year, right? So other kids we're taking global, but if you're going to take an honors level course, it's ultimately world. So there's always a lot that we could think about with our AP courses. Questions, and I know we get them all the time, questions about how well do our kids perform? Are they performing well enough, or are we getting enough fives? What teachers are promoting kids taking AP tests? Kids, we have open enrollment. We really, really, really strongly believe in that. Our teachers strongly believe in open enrollment. But our numbers may be different than another school district where they don't have open enrollment? Yeah, absolutely. But that's part of our core belief. It's our culture that we have open enrollment, and we want kids engaged in that level of course. And just because you didn't score a 5 doesn't mean that that course wasn't valuable and that you weren't engaged and that you didn't learn. We also know we sometimes get a little bit of senioritis, and sometimes that influences scores. So, I think, I said it a few minutes ago, we have to decide who we want to be. And if we want to be a place that offers opportunity for kids, and the AP scores are always going to have there's always a variable nature to them because of those parameters or variables, I'll call them.
So let me ask a question, because I know the policy is that if you take the AP class, you have to take the exam at the end of the year. And we do know that senioritis factors into a lot of the performance on the exam. Is it worthwhile to consider changing that particular policy of?
Which one?
If you take the class, you have to take the exam. It's not optional.
I'm going to say, I'd hold that question until Dave Cohn is in the room, because I could tell you my opinion, and my opinion would be we should have the exam. If a student is opting in to take an AP course, that course is designed with an exam at the end. And so I would rather say I am less concerned about a student getting a 5, and that's why I believe that if that student benefited from sitting in there, the test to me isn't the end-all be-all. I would be concerned about the message it sends if you don't have to take the exam at the end.
So let me give you the other side, which is that as a student, I'm already pushing myself to take a more rigorous class. And there is an expense associated for the family with taking the test, $90 per exam, which can add up if you're taking more than one. So is it enough of a message to say, hey, we're proud of you that you're pushing yourselves to be a little, to be more rigorous in your schooling, and therefore you're taking a more advanced class. You can decide at the end whether or not you're prepared to take the exam, or whether or not your family wants the expense.
I don't know.
I guess side of the argument. I don't know what.
And I hear that. I guess I would need somebody to give me some feedback on, is that what happens in college? At the end of the course, you're told you can take this exam or not? So for me, I think we need to decide what world we want to live in. So I will say this publicly because I know it will never change. My belief is I don't know why we brought college into high school. I think it's on this is my own philosophical belief. I don't know why we feel the need to bring college into high school. I think we have robbed kids of a pure high school experience in this rigor and demand to keep moving faster and more. Now, I'm saying I could say that because I know it'll never change. So for me, though, I think, well, if that's the world we're going to live in and we're bringing those courses in, that's why I would ask you that question. Your kids are in college. At the end of the semester, are they given the option to take the exam or not?
Yes. In some.
So then I think, yes, so that's what I'm saying. So that's what I would use as, and I'm saying that's what we should be using as a discussion point. Because for me, we're asking kids to commit to something, and you're right, it's complicated by the fact that there's a cost factor. I agree with you on that one. That feels like it's a game changer.
And even more so, it used to be that you took these classes because then the college you went to would give you
yes.
credit.
That's
but
right.
Increasingly, that's not
the case.
That the colleges,
that's right.
They'll take note of the fact that you took it, and
which sort of speaks to such a.
It just means you take a more advanced class in your freshman year, but you still have to do 4 full years of all the credits that you.
Yeah, it's fair. I think it's complicated, and that's why I'm saying. And it's really a conversation that Dave Cohn needs to be here for. I don't, and there's no right or wrong answer to this.
Because the one thing, following up to what the questions about the AP exams and kids opting out, because then also you do have kids who are taking the AP class for the distinction of being on their transcript.
That's right.
But really are very blasé and are over by the time they take the exam. So from our perspective, looking at the scores. Excuse me?
When they're
Senioritis.
seniors.
Senioritis, by the time May hits, you've already been accepted into college,
You're blowing off the exam. You're blowing off the exam.
You
You're not
don't
taking
even
it
study
seriously,
for it.
you're
You
not
don't.
studying,
I
and you're not taking it seriously. So from.
So you could
so
argue
from an
we should let juniors
administrator,
take
a
AP.
board perspective, a building
Yeah.
principal's perspective, some of those scores are now kind of tainted.
Yeah, look, and that's why I'm saying, there are so many ways to look at this, and I don't think there's a right way. I think there, I hear that, but I think that, I also think there's a message in it that I think is a slippery slope.
What do you mean by that?
That you don't have to take the AP exam at the end, that's your choice.
So here's what I.
Or is it that school ends in May?
I just want,
No.
Seniors, it
feel
doesn't.
feel free to ask any questions. I'll just say that we've clearly heard that it'll be a stronger conversation when we have
the
Dave
fall.
Cohen. in.
Exactly, and then again, go ahead, Catherine, wait, let's say one more thing, I got.
want to pose one other thing, because one of the things that is stuck in my craw forever is the world history. And I love Ms. Geelan, and I think she's a fabulous teacher, and certainly her results on the AP exam speak for themselves. But it's always bothered me that students who take her class get 50s, 60s, 70s on their tests during the year, and end up maybe, with an 80 or a 90, and yet most of them, if not all of them, score 5s, which, oh, by the way, when you look at the national data across the nation, 8% of the country who takes that exam scores a 5. So here we have Irvington students scoring at the level of the top 8% in the country and getting 80s. It doesn't make sense.
So I
that's
think-
one of the, so could there be a situation where the exam is optional, but if you do exceptionally well, it has the potential to raise your grade? I
So
don't know.
again, I'm gonna say, I think this is definitely a conversation with Dave here. The other thing, though, that I would say back on that, just for a minute, which goes back to one of the previous slides, which is, I think it's incumbent upon us to examine our data. So if our AP data is so skewed from our classroom grading data, I think it raises different questions for us. And I don't know if I want to say the answer is to not have the test. I think we need to be examining, what's that about? I could ask 7 questions. That's that, right? So,
So this is what's exciting about the next part of our
all
conversation.
right, I'm going, Michael, I'm going. Go ahead,
And
Tara.
you are going to go, I was going to say, because it is assessment, and at some point, maybe I'll get to it, but the thing about AP exams is that we have open enrollment, and we've acknowledged that we have students who, maybe get senioritis, and their score doesn't reflect really how the class met the objectives that the teacher set out for. How are you assessing an AP course if you're not taking into consideration the scores that the kids are getting?
So I guess the question, when you say, I guess, for me, there's another question there, which is, what does it mean to assess an AP course?
Right, so
And
is
I
that
think
coming
that
out?
that's a different, because for me, and again, this goes back, I don't know, are we assessing it to understand the relationship between the data, the grading and the AP data? That's one thing. But are we assessing it to determine if we should give that AP course?
So where does that come up in program assessment? That's what my question is.
So I think that that's a way different conversation. I think that speaks to offerings, and that is a different, for me, there's a lot of different columns of work that have some overlap, but, so I said to you a few minutes ago, in 2000, we had 1 AP course. Scarsdale got rid of their AP courses. So I'm not so sure the question is around assessing our AP course in and of itself, because we're really working toward an expectation and standard defined by someone else, not defined by Irvington. We don't get to say what that course is gonna be. So that's what I mean,
Same
right?
with the
So
SUPA.
it takes the work, it takes the curriculum out of the hands of the public school when we offer these courses.
And that is my biggest challenge in this entire presentation, is when we look at high school, and we look at the second half of high school in particular, junior and senior year, and we're offering 21 AP courses,
Right.
most of which are open enrollment, all but one is, right, basically the understanding. How are we assessing those AP courses?
But, so I'm gonna say it back, and we could talk more, moving on. And again, I would want Dave here, but, because I obviously his opinion matters most, in terms of me and the two of us. But what I'm saying to you is the question is you have to decide, I guess, as a board, what do you want to assess? So,
Doesn't this
Yeah.
answer your question, Deb?
No, because this is,
Well-
if we look at the AP exam scores, our district is saying we can't use them to assess because there's open
Then you've got your
enrollment.
answer.
Well,
no, I wasn't
no.
saying that, Deb. Oh, no, no,
And-
no, I didn't say that.
And I think, though, if we looked
You
at this
answered your own
data
question.
against national norms, that would give us
Right.
further insight, because I figure the senioritis thing is probably a national phenomenon. If we're
That's right.
seeing, a disproportionate number of kids who are getting 1s and 2s on the AP as opposed to national data, that will tell us maybe something about that offering.
Well, and
Right.
that's certainly
Is
the
that number of
benefits
children on the left, on the X?
Yeah.
But wait, I just want to clarify, because that wasn't what I was, I'm not saying we can't assess, I'm saying we have to decide what we're assessing. So if we want to assess our performance, that isn't what I thought you were asking, Deb. I misunderstood your
Do you
question.
mean if, for example, I'm looking at this graph, right, which is, it shows me.
AP exam scores.
Yeah, can you go back one slide? It's one slide back, right. So if I'm looking at this does tell me, right, how we're doing. Understanding with the tainted with the senioritis and the whole thing, got it, which answers your question is, can't really measure it because it's not gonna be accurate, right? Based on the fact that nobody takes them seriously, are they, right, isn't that what we said a minute ago?
Not
Senioritis?
all,
But
Not all, but
There is-
some.
there is
It's
a-
not
there is
consistent.
a
So the
percentage of the
Which is your
population.
point, right? So you answered the question is that you can't really, this is the way to do it based on the, but I look here and so I think your point, Raina, I look at the music theory and the drawing and the 2D design and Latin, all regions that I'm presuming are high quality and the instruction's probably excellent. I know we all know about the Latin program, right? But I'm presuming the X-axis is number of students, right? Nobody's taken the 2D design one,
It's interest too.
even though the one kid
Well, I think the.
who
two
took it
kids
got a
are-
5.
Right. they're-
Right, but what I'm saying, but the one kid got a 5, that's amazing. But do you need the course? I think that's what, do we want to assess drawing? And is the college that kid's gonna go to, do they care about the AP?
I think,
Right, that's the big
I
question.
Probably
think,
going to a drawing school.
And they don't care about the AP, I guarantee it.
so the question is, you have to decide what you're assessing. There's a million things we could, maybe not. a
Well,
million,
so,
but-
and I guess where I take this, because what you're saying is, and what we will talk about at, coming up, I think, as part of our reorg meeting, is we have our meeting calendar for the upcoming year. And so we can talk about what are the types of things. So we can look at one slide or two, or a number of slides about AP, or we can do that discussion about Regents, to do a discussion about AP, and ask those kinds of questions in which you have time to prepare. Dave is here, who's really the expert, because it's his building, and we can dive into it.
So why program assessment? So here are just some key factors, right? Why is it important? And you can see the range there. It informs decision-making, curriculum instruction, fiscal responsibility, integration of interdisciplinary instructional technology, informs teacher, related to student, it helps us monitor our system. So there's tons of good reasons why we should have program assessment. And I'm going to get to what program, but we're still going to debate what that actually is. So measuring success, I touched on this a little bit earlier. We want to make sure that we have clear goals when we set out to do, to engage in something new. And for the moment, I'm going to call it an initiative, because I too struggle with what a program is, but I do know that we have several initiatives that we have moved forward. We want to make sure we have qualitative. We want to make sure that we have some, there's data in there, quantitative data, observational data, depending on what the initiative is. There are times surveys are appropriate, as well as that last piece, which is the communication structure. So how do we ensure that we have a system and a process that has what I would call a beginning, a middle, and an end? And that beginning, middle, and end could be cyclical. It could start again. It doesn't mean it's the end of what you've done, but we've come to a targeted end that we had laid out there to say, in 3 years, in 2 years, in 1 year, here is what we'll know a year from now, 2 years from now, and so on. So at the end of your presentations, we started to infuse this structure of approach, implementation, and results. The approach, what are our questions? What are we trying to do? And how are we going to do it? The implementation is, what is the actual plan for what we're trying to accomplish? And then the results. What do we know? And sometimes the what do we know, it always, in a perfect world, it always ends up back with students and student achievement, because that's ultimately what we're all about here. And when I say achievement, student performance, student engagement, lots of, but in the center really is student. But as you've seen over time, it very often starts with teachers, because in order to get to students, we need to consider what our practices look like and what our teachers are doing and what our curriculum includes. So the approach, what are the questions? The purpose is to obtain information that can be used to answer. Are students learning what they need to grow and succeed? Are we improving students' ability to learn? Should our curriculum or teaching strategies be modified? Are there other techniques, additional resources that would help our students learn more effectively? So it's not that these are the concrete questions we're going to ask every single time. It gives you the frame for how to think about it. So when we think about PLTW and implementing PLTW, and we think about this, are students learning what they need to grow and succeed? Well, what were we faced with? No, we didn't have a STEM curriculum. We actually had nothing that we could hang our hats on that said that we were ensuring that we were giving students an experience and preparing them for what we know moving forward is going to be a critical field beyond their education here in Irvington. You know, so when we frame those questions for you, again, it's not that those specific questions will be answered each time. It's that's where we want to ensure that we're looking at what are students doing, are they doing what we believe is the kind of work, and are they engaged in a way that we think makes sense for the goals of the Irvington School District. So that starts with the approach. It's those beginning questions. The implementation, we have to decide on our purpose. There's lots of reasons to implement, there's lots of reasons to make decisions, but naming it is really important. And I think if I look back, I think that sometimes maybe I've known it in my head, or a teacher's known it, or one of the building principals have sort of known it, but we haven't said it. So making sure that we decide on that purpose and we're clearly articulating the purpose is really critical. Articulate in measurable and observable terms the program level student outcomes. So what is it we're hoping to accomplish? What will our students know, look like, and be able to do as a result of this initiative or implementation? We want to connect the outcomes to the program, so a curriculum alignment. We want to make sure that what we're doing aligns with our other goals, other initiatives, and other work and expectations that we have for our students. And we want to agree on the strategies, those measures, connect with the outcomes, establish the level of performance, and then collect that evidence. So during the implementation phase, those are the key components during the implementation. And you'll notice there the related notes, programs do not have to measure every outcome every year. Sometimes there are going to be, in initiatives, there are things that are more measurable after 1 year, after 2 years, but knowing that going in is really important. And then the end game, right? The results. What do we know now? Does the program or initiative meet or exceed certain standards? What were those standards that we set out to meet, and are we meeting them? Does the program do a good job at what it set out to do? So if we go back and we say, here's what we wanted to know, and here were the goals for the programs, and here are the learner outcomes, did we get to where we wanted to be, and how can the program experience be improved? So that's the end game, to say, do we go back on that cycle, and are we saying there's a next level of work and growth? Are we saying, you know what, we're where we need to be? Or are we saying, you know what, I'm not so sure that this was exactly what we needed, what we were trying to accomplish. Do we need to adjust this in some way to actually meet that goal? So one of the components of the program assessment model will include a glossary of terms. I think that one of those pieces, and I know sometimes it makes people crazy, you call it edu-speak. We don't mean to do that, but it's our field, it's our area, and so we say things we don't even realize we're saying them. So yes, having that really nicely defined for people, so when we talk, people understand the language that we're using. So just some examples, and again, I mean, it may seem like, oh, do we need a definition of program goals? Well, yes, because I think people could have different definitions. So if there are different perceptions of what something is, that will lead to confusion down the road when we get to that end of results, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that's what you meant. So we want to make sure that we have real clear definition for each of these terms. And that was just a sampling. So the framework will be embedded in the planning, in the planning process right from the beginning. The program, name of the program being assessed, the goal, program goal, and anticipated outcomes. However many years we want to include in the action plan, depending on what that initiative is. And what will the approach be, the implementation, and then ultimately those results. So for tonight, I wanted to give you an example. This is an example of one that we've backed into. And as I shared, we're going to be backing in over the summer and moving into next year. We will be backing into several of the initiatives that we've rolled out in the last few years. I'll be working with the building administrators over the summer to identify which programs/initiatives we'll be backing into at this point. Here's what I promise you. I am not going to go and create something that didn't exist. So while I wish we had a perfect model from the get-go, we didn't. So I'm not going to go and now implement something or create some documents so that I could say to you, oh, this is what we said 4 years ago. So what you see will be what existed. So for example, I used foundations as an example, and what we actually have, which I'm looking forward to sharing with you, is when it was Randy was here at the time as the Dow's Lane principal. So we started our foundations journey by surveying teachers. So I actually have a lot of data that you'll find when we share with you this program assessment model in its complete form. You'll see there's all this initial data from, our first question was, do teachers believe that foundations is a program we should be pursuing? Do we want to, all the way to now, which is the most recent survey, where we've asked teachers, so what do you think? We've now in year 4, are we better off as a result of foundations? We're going to triangulate the teacher feedback with our data, with our AIMSweb data, our foundations assessment data, as well as questions that we're having about the F&P and the relationship, which surface now. What's the relationship between how kids perform on foundations and our reading assessments? And is there a relationship there? And how do we ensure that teachers understand how you put that data together to actually come up with some sort of a profile of information? So what you'll see is in 14-15, which was our first year, we had an approach, we had an implementation, and we ultimately had some results. In the very first year, our results was the teacher information. We had no student. We had barely implemented it. There was nothing to tell. In 15-16, we continued to build on that. Our approach was our first year, we implemented in K-1. Our next year, we implemented in second grade. So when you look at that program assessment, that program model, what you're seeing is our path for implementation. In 16-17, we continued to monitor and evaluate. What it's worth noting is up until through this year, we continued to have professional learning support from the foundations people. So we reduced how many days the person was in district. So we started out with X number of days, and then little by little reduced it to the point where next year we have a plan we work through gradual release. Now we're moving, and Deb and Andrea will have their own building level plan for how to continue to monitor and evaluate the implementation of foundations. So that was the goal, to get from implementation, having that level of support, and then ultimately what you'll see when this document is complete is you'll see the analysis of student performance, which is the end game for this type of program. So and then ultimately that's next year, and so that's the plan going into next year, and that's what I just was referring to, which is the gradual release plan to ensure implementation of foundations with fidelity. And I had a wonderful colleague and mentor who always used to say, if you implement and you invest in something and then you don't tend to it, it falls apart. And not because we're bad, and not because we're evil, and not because we don't believe in something, but programs and implementations in schools needs to be tended to on a yearly basis because there are too many competing demands. So if we didn't continue to have a plan in place for how to ensure the fidelity of foundations implementation, Within a few years, teachers would, not purposely, not for any reason, but, oh, I don't do that part of foundations anymore. Oh, I don't think the kids need that. You know, I ran out of time. I couldn't do that. It's not bad. They're not bad teachers, but that's what happens. It starts to dissipate. And so having a plan in place at the end of anything we're committing to is critical. And that's an important question for all of us to be asking. How will we ensure that our investment of time and money is going to remain in place, and we are going to ensure that we are implementing at the highest levels of fidelity and expectations for whatever our program outcomes are. So having that last piece is really, really important in this model. So that just gives you an example of foundations, which started in the 14-15 school year, continues, and I would say, sometimes people say, I don't know, is it like ever gonna end? This would be one that I would end in 18-19, as far as the document, with the expectation of, here's what the ongoing work looks like, though, in 18. What we put in 18-19 is what you would expect to continue for as long as we've decided to do foundations. So you might say, how long is that, Raina? Are we gonna, in 20 years, are we still gonna be doing foundations? So how do we know that we're gonna circle back and check back in on this? And I think that, for me, is the next question that I don't necessarily have an answer to tonight. I think that that's an important, I think it's an important question for us.
I'm just trying to understand, so in terms of the evolution of the plan next year, it marks the end of that, but the analysis would be ongoing?
Ongoing.
Yeah, okay.
Ongoing. So that's so Michael, I'm glad you said that, right? Because that is what I'm saying. So that's going to continue. So at what point do we circle back and do we put foundations, and maybe this is it, I don't know. Does foundations go sort of in a column of curriculum review cycle that says, in 3 years, let's make sure, we're collecting our data every year, but maybe we need to do a deeper dive assessment to say, do we want to continue to do foundations as our foundational program at Dow's Lane?
So we used to basically have a 5-year, textbook.
Well, we had a document that said that, yeah.
But we had a document that said that, okay. We didn't necessarily do that with fidelity. But that's the evolution of this, is we have to figure out the cycle.
Yeah.
All right.
I have several questions at this time.
Do you tell me,
But you let
Michael, what
me
do you want to do?
Do you have a couple slides?
So I think I'm almost done. I don't really know. I think I am not. Oh, yeah, this is it. So program assessment, implementation, and communication. Program assessment will become a component of our annual work. Future initiatives, goal-setting process, the framework that I just shared with you. Current, we're going to go back, we'll name the original goal, we'll collect whatever data we have. You know, just because we didn't develop it this way, I do want to say that a lot of what we've done, we do have some background data. Is it different when you plan from the beginning with a little bit more intent and purpose? No question, it would be better. But I think that I was amazed actually when I went back to 14-15 at how much good thinking there was behind the implementation. I shouldn't have been that surprised, but I was a little bit, that we had that much survey data as just our starting point. So reflect on action steps through the lens of the framework and then develop some next steps. So with that.
Q&A on the next slide.
You seem excited, David. You want to launch into some?
Yeah,
Questions?
certainly. I'm going to distill it. I'm going to make this easy because I'm bad at this, so I'm going to do a better job tonight. I'm going to distill it into one observation and one piece of feedback, if I may. So I applaud the work that you've done put into this. Clearly, like, I love the structure. The way it's dressed is very clear for not only a board, but also a community. So I think that there's a real framework for progress in this area, so that's exciting. I will, also say that without, this is something we've been talking about for a long time, so it's not a new piece. Without actual substance in these boxes, it means it's just dressing. And I urge us, as a team, right, administrative and a board team, along with the community, to really force the idea that not the goal, like when you look at the goal, right, let's go back to where it says 2014, 15, 20, right, the boxes. 2014, 15, right, so the survey results, I'm presuming a report that we'll get will actually have numbers in there, right? Great. When we get down, look at the goal, to increase K through 2 students' foundational base of learning, create consistency across classrooms, Develop targeted foci for intervention practices. I say this again with all due respect, that is just a lofty statement. It is not, it's a goal in lofty statement. It's not you're using Foundations. Foundations is a proven tool. It's an excellent tool. It's a wonderful investment and a logical choice to push. There's no shame or harm in saying by the end of second grade, X% of students will be reading at or above whatever level you deem to be appropriate, right? Whatever the number is. Because when you go into the results column, and why this structure works so beautifully, is I should be able to look, okay, great, so if we did this, we delivered Foundations, right? And then when I get to 17, 18, where it says analysis of student performance, I should be able to see, like you suggest, that there'll be data in there, but it needs to correlate back to that goal so that we can say yes, because you asked the question yourself. You said the purpose is to say, are we going to continue, right? Something tangible for the board, for the community is, wow, and again, you create the goal, right? I say that looking at you because you create what is a realistic goal for you, for your teachers, for your teams. It's not a driven piece, but it needs to measure the growth so we can then say, wow, okay. Well, and again, it doesn't have to be all second graders are reading it, whatever it is. You can say all second graders are in fact, based on Ames Web, based on the state, not the state exams, but the Foundations data, all students are reading at or above this grade level, right? The Fountain Spinell tells us that.
Right.
But
So, I mean, but I would, I mean, when I hear you both, I would feel like you're elaborating on what you're saying, so you can tell me if that's wrong. He's saying, he's giving a specific example, so it may not be what he said, but you would define what you're looking for.
But more importantly, the goal itself should be directly, so when I look at that results box,
Yes.
and I see the more specific example that you're alluding to, right? I should be able to go, aha, that shows me that we're either on track to meeting this goal, we've met the goal, or we're not meeting the goal, and we need to reevaluate the program.
Can I ask a question? Is it really that simple? Because then, what about cohorts? You know, you can have certain cohorts, like, so what you're saying is by second grade, I'm just throwing round numbers. Kids should be reading at level K, 85% of the grade should be reading at level K. But we know that different cohorts, some cohorts are stronger than others in certain areas. So is that a realistic goal?
Yes, it is,
Yeah.
and I agree with what Dave is saying.
But you can
have to
set the goal however you need to.
You have to understand
Cohorts.
what it is you're trying to achieve when you're implementing something. So if you're implementing Foundations, what did you see that wasn't working in the old program that you think Foundations is now solving? And hopefully it
That I
is
agree
to
with.
raise the cohort so that where before we saw a gap in student performance at the lower cohorts, now we want to raise everybody up so that, to Dave's point, at the end of Foundations implementation, we can see the measurable difference between what it used to be and what it is now with the improvement of Foundations. So I agree with Dave, you have to say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And this was the feedback I gave to Dave Cohen, too, with the new plan for the high school. What are we trying to solve that is going to be made better by what we're implementing? And how are we going to know at the end of it that what we've implemented has solved the problem?
And just to further build on that, right? So there was this slide 11. You go back to slide 11, which is fantastic. I'm so happy to see this slide, right? I love this slide. And then there's the math one and the one that we're going to see in a few minutes, right? The idea that you're looking at, 2011 grade 3, 2012 the same grading now in grade 4, and really like tracking the progress over a decade or 8 years, 7 years, whatever it might be. And again, I'm just using this as an example, okay? Because I know how you feel about the state exams. But let's just say it's your own common assessment piece 2 years from now when our foot's all the way in the water and the ankle's in and we're swimming. And I see that and I know that we went from 60% to 59 to 7. Why? What about the 25% of kids in 8th grade? This group of kids, 25%, we went from 82% to 75. But like, just again, what's going on there? We can build questions, evaluate programs, and look. And this kind of data, whatever is the source, right, is very valuable in that results column. If that results column but the goal has to be clear. And just art, like, and I don't know what the fear is. I know it's difficult to throw a number out there, but Foundations is a really excellent program. And one that you can look across multiple districts using Foundations and really look at trends and analyze those trends. And I think it would benefit. Look, I've seen it work on my own child. I know we try to avoid talking about our own children, but I've seen it work with my own child this year in the 2nd grade. He walked into 2nd grade and he could not read. He couldn't read.
A child you know. That's what we got to start using that first.
Okay, well,
Raina,
a child that I know,
I think all we're saying
you know, and now he can.
is that
The data, I saw it.
instincts are great, and Foundations is a great program, and we think you have the evidence, and you could,
But is there a disconnect though? I feel, I mean, isn't that you want to, he's giving a specific example. You may not agree with that specific example, but you
Right.
do plan to
We have it.
Yes.
I have it. My links are gone out of your version.
Right.
I have it. That's what I'm saying to you. That we did it, and I think what you would, so I'm gonna go back to the goal, because I would argue, and I hear you, Dave, and I understand how you wanna write that goal, but I would say that there are different pieces going in, and you know, as we go down this journey, we're gonna have to, I think, develop some common understanding of what goals are. Goals are not always these measurable pieces for us that name it at 25% are. We had a problem. We didn't have a consistent we did not have consistent foundational instruction at Dow's Lane.
how did you know?
Because every classroom you walked into, the teacher they were doing different things.
And how, and what
So
did
I'll
that,
tell you-
and what
so-
was the manifestation?
So we're 95% of the classrooms.
What was the
So,
result?
so that's what I want to share, right. So-
What's the
So
result?
Kevin, let me answer, so let me explain it. So that's my point, we're not widgets. So one of the reasons that we want to develop consistency across classrooms is because it is better for kids that if we know they're getting a consistent curriculum, I'll use Main Street. There was a time when if you were in one class, you got this, and if you were in another class, you got that, and if you were in another class, you got something else. Now, all the kids moved to 5th grade, I'm the 5th grade teacher. I have some from this class, and I have some from this. So Raina and Michael know this, and Carol and Maria know that, and Catherine and Deb know that. Well, now I'm playing catch-up, because you guys know how to do this research work, and you don't know how to do the research work. So I guess I'm not arguing against what you're saying. I argue against what feels sometimes to me like a very narrow lens of why we're doing this work. Let me finish. And so what I just want to make sure we're doing is we go forward and we start to explore each of these initiatives, programs. I don't want you to be so narrow in that it's a component, what you're saying. That's the part, you're right, Michael, I agree. It is a fair and needed component, but why we implement is not only about measuring the exact achievement, it's because it is better for our schools to have consistent curriculum being delivered from one classroom to the next.
And I'm not disagreeing.
I don't disagree
Why?
either.
What are you trying?
I just explained why. Because otherwise a teacher is wasting their time because they're playing catch-up. And I'm giving you that point because
It's not about teachers wasting their time, it's ensuring that every student has the same education.
right, well, I started by saying that, right? That I want to ensure that every classroom, that kids are getting the same thing across. So
In one
we're
example,
not-
How do you know that they're not?
I know, because we spend time we're in classrooms all the time. So there's nothing more joyful than doing a building walkthrough and literally walking in from one class to the next and seeing the delivery of instruction
Wonderful.
consistent.
But so there's nothing wrong, and this is where I think our difference of opinion is, with saying, and yes, it's okay to say this and it's okay not to get there. 100% of classrooms will have and be implementing X, whatever the coherent curriculum that's, but I don't understand the look, because that's what you want. And if that's what you want,
I guess it's cultural. I guess I would say this, I want
right, but
to,
it's cultural that we don't have it at 100%. That's
all right, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on because I guess what I'm saying is I'm not arguing your point, but I guess I'm not sure you're understanding.
Another example,
mine.
if I can just take your point of, you know, we were talking about PLTW at prior meetings, and one of the piece of feedback we got is that because it's maturing, that the work is progressing at a different pace, which means they're taking on different units. So in terms of the single test, whatever that parameter may be, that may be a narrow parameter that doesn't capture it, but we're doing all these other things as well. Would that?
It is. So let me give you the other example to that. Because yes, there's no question, and we are definitely looking to measure that implementation. But what I would say to you, when we implemented PLTW, while I would love to say it was about ultimately measuring achievement, we knew these next-gen science standards were coming out. We knew that we didn't have a STEM-based program. We knew that we needed to get some engineering into our curriculum because we were at a strong deficit. So at that moment in time, while yes, eventually we were going to be able to measure more, we've seen like increase in females in taking math and engineering course. But I will tell you, at that moment in time, it was sort of visioning to a couple of years from now where we knew the standards were changing. So I don't know that I had a measure at that moment. I could come up with one, but we knew we needed to get this in the Irvington curriculum. So I guess I just want you to come to the table on this, understanding that it's both. There are some hard numbers, and you can set those numbers, the 100%, the 20, however you want, but not in the absence of some of the softer. We're a human business. And developmentally, by the way, you have kids who can't read in first grade, and they're reading in third. And just because they couldn't read yet in first, developmentally, and you know the research, Dave, that doesn't mean that, I guess what I don't want it to be is, oh, wait, we're not meeting this standard when we know developmentally kids grow in different ways and times, and we want to make sure we're correlating to our intervention data. So for me, it would be more important to ensure that our Ames Web and that our interventions are aligning so that all of our kids are reading at that level, at whatever point we're going to set. So I'm just saying it's a bigger picture.
Is that different than what you're saying?
No,
Okay.
you're on the money. It's just,
Give an
all I'm
example
saying is that
you
Yeah.
question, but I think ultimately it's the
the
same.
program is working because we know that 85%, even though we said,
Okay, Dave, we have to give,
Hold on, but I think we're talking about stuff, but I think there's also different programs and different goals. My understanding is foundations came about because we were looking to have consistent instruction in K through 2.
Yep.
So that's the goal of that program. We may have a goal of our high school math program that we're seeing a deficit in how kids are learning and scoring, and that may be more measurable by test scores than foundations necessarily. But I still don't, so I think we have to be mindful of that. I still think, though, there can be some data that we look at with the foundations, whether it's, how do our kids perform on the third grade state test versus other districts that don't have a similar program? Are we seeing better scores in third grade or fifth grade or somewhere down the road where we now have this consistent instruction, and is that leading to stronger results down the road?
And I'm with you. That's why I'm saying I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying. I just want to make sure the other piece is there. So I'll give you an example. In the feedback survey to the teachers now, that our students are leaving third grade having had foundation, one of the questions I asked is about handwriting. Right? Is the handwriting better? It's subjective a little bit, right? There's no real data around that. There's no test that we give for handwriting.
but shouldn't you norm one?
What?
Shouldn't you norm one amongst the staff?
Maybe not. Maybe not. I'm not so sure. In other words, we want to continue to increase it, and we want to continue to increase the quality. But I'm going to also be honest with you. There's just so many hours in the day, and there's just so many things you can measure. So I think we better be really clear on what we want to measure. And that's why this model is important. Because I think what I said somewhere at the very beginning of this is you have to be clear on why you're doing it. What's your purpose? There's a ton of things you can find out. My dissertation, I could have gone on and on and on research on leadership. At some point, I had to decide on what was the purpose of my dissertation, what was my research, and then what are the questions at the end that now, if I were to do my next level of research. So knowing your purpose when you do create this model is going to be really important for us, because there's always going to be questions I don't know that we're going to be able to answer and measure all of them.
So my question is the million-dollar question, which I had raised earlier, is this is
course it's $1 million.
Well, because he knows what I'm referring to.
That's a self-assessment. That's a self-assessment.
Assessment, but it's called program assessment model. What's a program?
Yeah.
How are we going to define what a program is, and who's going to determine what programs get measured?
Yeah, I think
Is
that's,
that not-
it's a great question. I think it's
Oh,
worth $1 million.
I'll
I think it's worth $1
contribute.
million.
I'll contribute, yes.
Yeah.
I have,
so
I
is
have,
that
I have it
gonna be
typed here on my screen.
Your related definitions and terminology page, are we gonna be adding, is this an organic
does that work?
document
It's
that's gonna be
just
added?
It is, yes, we're gonna keep adding, and I'm telling you, it's much longer than what you're seeing there. So I think that's a great question, and I think it's a question that probably
Is
is
it $1 million question?
a couple thousand. So I think that we're gonna have a better answer to that in September. You know, once I meet with all the building administrators and we back into some of the things we've done. So I know that I feel like I know some of the things we have questions about. Freshman writing, PLTW, I have another like big one in my head that I can't.
Yeah, but what determines how you come up with the list? Like, what are you
So
looking at?
I think, well, we're gonna have to decide that a little bit, right? So I think and that's what I'm saying, once we back into some of the things we've done over these last few years, I think I'm gonna come back to you and I may say, I don't see how this is or this isn't. So I think there's a couple of ways we can look at it. One way is to say, well, if there's something we're implementing and it's going to impact a certain cohort, like freshman writing, it was a whole grade. I don't know, that feels like it needs a structure in place.
Yeah.
PLTW, we're buying a program.
But can I just,
Yeah.
a key word that you just said, which is, a lot of us have used that, and what I've, as a student of your presentations over the last number of years, what this gets at is the cohort, and I think that's, you know, we do very well on a number of measures that other high schools say, okay, we're good, and we want to go deeper, and we want to be able to support our students, and I think, for me, that's something I get excited about, is that we can really start to look at it in terms of cohorts.
Yeah,
And that it's more substantial because we have a number of different measures, and that's the piece that we have to figure out in terms of what those are.
but then there's the broader look of programs. So somebody might say, well, what is our ELA program,
Yep.
right? So what is our ELA program, or what's our math program? So I know you asked about high school. So yeah, it's trickier at the high school, right? Because unlike at the elementary school where we might say, you know, our math program is Go Math. It isn't Go Math, but it's the math modules. But then, you know, we would look at it that way. And at the elementary, we tend to name it more. When you start to get to the secondary level, we don't buy programs at the secondary level. So I think then it becomes more programmatic, right? So what is our learning program over time? What does science look like from 6th to 12th grade? How do we know that the implementation of the New York State Science Learning Standards is effective? And so that's yet another way, right, to talk about program.
You've done it with world languages in terms
With
of,
the Apple.
and
Yes.
fluency in terms of
Yes.
speaking and hearing, and listening.
So that answers one of the questions, is that for the model you've developed, it doesn't rule out existing programs to be evaluated? 'Cause
No.
I was concerned that it really was only going to apply to new initiatives.
No, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we were clear on that, I'm honest, which to say is, we're gonna back into these now and fit them into the framework. Now, some of the pieces, you know, our building, as I said, the building administrators use the framework in their end of year. I think we're gonna have an okay time backing in the sense that we really did know why we did, like, we didn't do anything frivolously. Will I have as good data on one thing as everything else? I don't know. It turned out when I backed into foundations, we really do have quite a bit of data starting back from when we set the initiative in place. I don't know if for all of them, but
So in other words, using foundations as a perfect example, you talked about at the beginning, you did a survey after the first year. Theoretically, you could have not have done it, so you wouldn't have had that
That's
kind of baseline.
right.
So
So
using that as
foundations
an
will work.
example, that could be something
Right.
that might not have worked if you didn't
Right,
have
so
certain
PLTW, you know, again, PLTW, a lot of us going into it was this belief and visioning of saying, hey, like, we need to get going on this. We're not where we need to be. So we didn't survey people to say, what do you think about this? because we just knew we needed to move forward and get a curriculum in place.
But that's a perfectly good purpose for, why are we
Absolutely.
doing this? We are preparing for the new.
Absolutely, I'm just saying, when you see how we back into it, some of them you're gonna see,
Ones might not work
They're
as
not all gonna look
perfectly
the
as
same.
some of the others.
Right.
yeah.
Can this apply to work like BARD with ELA or Metamorphosis with math?
Yes, yes. And I think we'll see some pieces to that.
I mean, I would say one of the, sort of just loosely, what we've discussed, we talked about this in the curriculum committee, is that you're showing us the work that you and Dr. Harrison and to a degree what the administrators have done up to now in terms of thinking about the model. This summer is really where you start to say, okay, let's start to
Right.
drive this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
And so in the fall, I would expect us at different points to understand, okay, this is what it's looking like,
Mhm.
because you really started to wrestle with it.
Right.
So when do you expect and I know this is, it could be multi-years, but in terms of a timetable, do we have that? Or is that something you're coming back in the fall to say, how are you going to approach this? I mean, it's such a big initiative in and of itself. Is there a timetable in which we're going to get in the fall? Like, what do you envision?
No, I envision that, we're gonna sit down in the summer, we're gonna back in. Honestly, I wouldn't spend a huge amount of time backing into things, so that's what I was trying to say before. I don't wanna spend everyone digging in their files to create, or make up something new to create. That's not worthwhile. So we're gonna back into the ones that exist and see how well we can do. I think PLTW is a great example of, we're gonna go back and build it a little bit, but really, we're in such a good place now to really start setting our targets, knowing where we wanna go, especially with the implementation of the K-2 program, right? We know we wanna start seeing difference at the middle level, that we absolutely, when I hear our 8th grade technology teacher talk about, it's hard to get the kids to the point where they're actually building the robots because there's still so much background knowledge kids don't have. We wanna be sending kids with that background knowledge. They should be in it. So we know a lot of the things. So with PLTW, I feel like we're going to be able to do a lot more moving forward, backwards, but clearly moving forwards. So I'm hoping when we start the beginning of the school year that we're able to pretty much take any new initiative that we're rolling out for 18-19, we'll be using this model. Like the model we're putting in place now.
But in terms of going back and assessing, like, for example, 9th grade writing.
Right, we're doing over the summer.
Okay.
Because you have the.
So and then I'll know how much data I really have. Jen DeLisi's done a lot of surveying, and we have some stuff, but I'm not sure I have what I would call a measure.
And also showing the flexibility of how things evolve. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, what you would have named when you put it in, but I think what's evolved to be seen as a strength is the interdisciplinary writing work, and so that might be
Yeah.
something that, okay, as this evolved, we saw that this was the strength of this program.
Yeah, I would also say that one of the things, and
How do we measure that consistency?
I'm sorry to say this because it's unfortunate, but it's true. So, it takes time for things to take off. It takes time for things to take hold. So one of the things that we will have by the beginning of this next year is almost all of our English teachers will have taught the 9th grade writing program. That is huge, because what we're seeing now is we're gonna see some of our teachers who taught the freshman writing program now in some of the upper grade courses. They will value, because they taught that course, they have a different perception and an understanding of what that course is. But what we're seeing now is, as we've brought more teachers on board to teach it, now they're looking at their 11th graders and 12th graders through a very different lens of saying, oh, we not only need to maybe tweak freshman writing, but now I see how in my courses, I need to be building on it. That freshman writing course shouldn't be sitting like this. It is a foundation course it should be seen as a foundation course for writing for students' time here in Irvington and beyond. But we had a lot of teachers who, while they were at the table and knew we were doing the course, they weren't connected enough to the course to actually be building on it when that next cohort of kids got to them. This year, we actually started to see some of the overlap. Next year, we'll see even more. So that taught us something about also implementation, right, for moving forward.
Will you also be looking backwards to say, okay, there were some gaps in 6, 7, 8, perhaps in grammar, perhaps in syntax, perhaps in other components of writing that maybe we need to address prior to freshman writing?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're definitely looking to see, like, right, what could we be embedding at the earlier grade? You know, certainly the feedback from our students has been that what they felt was the most helpful was the interdisciplinary writing, not, you know, when they were getting feedback on their writing from other courses. So we're also trying to balance. We're trying to balance what kids are finding valuable, what we ultimately believe needs to be put in there. And I just want to put it out there, it's an every other day course. So there's also a limited amount of time that these teachers actually have with kids in this course. It's basically a half year of instruction. So those are all the components we're looking at, but absolutely.
But going, what was Catherine saying, I almost look at it, you used the example before about Project Lead the Way with, with like
The
8th
robots.
grade robots.
That's right.
And going back and
That's right.
teaching them some things.
Exactly.
So to me, that also.
No question.
What she was saying
Yep.
about, not she.
What's that foundational knowledge that
About-
kids should be coming into 9th grade with that we're not seeing, and how do we embed that?
And
Right.
that speaks to
Embedded in the early-
the
right,
underlying work
exactly.
you've also been doing with having the articulated curriculum, so you're starting to look at it backwards and forwards. and
Exactly.
across the grade. So That's very good.
Okay, great.
Any,
This is exciting,
yeah.
really.
Not only is it exciting,
Yay, Maura!
it speaks to,
Can you pull the mic a little closer?
No, stop, don't say that.
stop, Michael, stop. I'm starting to come around to the idea that within rigor, if executed properly, there's also room for a whole child. And Raina, I have to say I appreciate it when you push back to structure your evaluations in a way that enables us to look at children in the round, because at the same time that I hear wonderful things coming from the measurement, including, okay, where are the gaps in what we're doing? I think that the perennial need to balance the anxiety that children and instructors feel about being evaluated still needs to be part of this understanding. And I feel like from the more I learn about the way that kids' anxiety manifests in different ages, to understand that we're driven by this, but it doesn't define anybody is important still, always to bring to every conversation that we have, as I know it must exist among the administration too.
Thank you.
Very good. I sense that we can transition, perhaps. Appreciate your
I can't believe that you.
excellent presentation. Do we, I think we need to take a 2-minute, 3-minute break, though, just to
Talk about it
address a
later.
few things?
Mike,
Okay.
say Chris Harrison. And did you have
I know,
to-
because it's the School Boards Association, not the superintendent.
That's something you're not correct.
But,
Would you like my series?
Because you measure
well,
something,
not
but
only
then
that,
that doesn't
but
mean you're
did
not
you have to
teaching the whole
sign
child.
your own?
But that's not what you just said. That is what you just said. It is literally exactly what you just said. You're just-
Thanks.
Because you just validated or continued off-putting of saying, how are you doing?
That's not what I intended to say.
I believe that.
I wonder
I
if
totally
kids would say, maybe we try.
That's what she heard.
Yeah.
Yes, well, that, and it can't be.
Because she,
Well, no,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
the colors are off, it's more the design,
Now in
but maybe black shorts or gray shorts, maybe gray shorts.
I was just gonna say, maybe the grade one.
it's the majority of the board, and it's not like I don't want it to be that.
no, I respect your opinion.
But ask the kids if they'd rather wear green or gray. Well, and maybe
Just undid a lot of push. Because you're
Obviously, that's the boys' uniform, not the girls.
all in all day.
you know, there's a lot of
There's two separate.
But what we're doing developmentally,
come to, but I want about the law.
I know.
I know. Yes.
We have a difference of opinion, I don't mind. Right?
Feedback on that, because,
That, this whole space needs revamping.
yeah, and that was the discussion.
Yeah.
But,
Is Dave
you know,
Cohn at that?
he was.
Okay.
He wasn't defined security, so he didn't want to, but the
Was
librarian.
Joyce?
I just was trying to give you
David's hotel was in there.
Oh, okay.
And,
Okay.
Loretta was in
Okay.
there. And,
Yeah, but my son-
Yeah, I know.
but we did talk about school board meeting space that we could
I'm just thinking,
It all needs to be all of it needs to be redesigned, and we've talked about what
some
we could do.
architects are excited about it, because there's a lot of space there.
Right.
And
I mean,
like
that, when
me-
you get to the point where that, I mean, I need to be at that conversation.
Right, oh yeah, once we get
Yeah.
to the detail, but,
the district level.
no, we have, if you have any particular impact that you didn't put in yet, I might want to.
I don't know, like, I think we need to talk about, you know, look, I mean, Dave and I have had lots of conversations about this. And, look, I mean, you know, David Cohn does not have enough space in that high school for all his classes, he really doesn't. So we need to find a way, I mean, we should be turning these into some classes, honestly.
Segmenting it.
You now have individual goals at the school level
Yeah.
that build off that district goal.
And one more, there's a collaborative space.
Now,
It's
my- as a-
I get it,
projects.
but my worry is that Dave doesn't have enough classrooms in the high school.
throughout the
They
year,
don't mind that upstairs space, and what are we
Right,
doing?
and what are we doing with
That
that?
might be the collaborative space, you know, if we could.
you can always tie it to numbers.
somehow, still keeping the open book and using
You're gonna be
what they call tight walls, which are.
4-7
brick walls that
paragraph.
are kind of like,
Right?
you see in,
Again,
but you're here.
Oh.
So, to create like study spaces or quiet spaces or collaborative spaces and have that all be upstairs.
that's fine. You would,
Teachers
but
for students, they sign them out, almost like in a library, you know, check out the spaces, and then you can kind of keep that,
that's all fine and dandy.
get away from books and use more technology to.
There's no question about that.
You know, so I think when we get time, you know, there's
Yeah.
two issues I'd like to
Yeah.
make sure.
I knew that there was conversation going on.
There's arrow of you.
I do, I appreciate that.
in this whole thing, we've got.
The worst thing is to try to do things last minute.
And go back to what I said, there's a lot of other things at play in that conversation.
There are a number of things. And I don't think, I mean,
But
yeah, it was a great article. I'm surprised you didn't send it around.
I try to keep the two separate.
Oh, but it's not, because it's a lesson to
it's
us.
100%.
And I absolutely read that. I don't think, I absolutely hear.
That happened, by the way.
And I hear.
Really?
No, I'm a germaphobe, so I don't normally share pens, but I figure you're.
I'm okay. I passed it.
Is that true?
Have you seen me share a pen with anyone?
You know what?
2 years?
I rarely even use a pen anymore, so I'm always typing, I don't know.
So anyway,
Right, and that's something that
I didn't hear any
needs to be
complaints from graduates about their diplomas, so I feel pretty good about that, because I had the worst signature.
so I, no, I watched
But
it right after that.
make it fun.
That was warning.
Let me know it's coming.
My hand.
Yes.
But I don't have
But
any
you
sick.
see my
Good for you,
I
yeah.
like stomach virus. I get those, but I can't.
I remember those days when the girls started going to pre-K, and I was sick for 4 years in a row. You know, till your body is, gets used to it. As educators in a school environment, you have a strong, you need to have one, I would think, strong system.
But there's certain things you can do, like not sharing pens and.
Developmentally inappropriate work in the elementary school. And
Okay.
they're being
But
cast
stomach virus is that bad, so they
teachers who are
food poisoning.
Yeah, but how you define it, when you, I mean, you're speaking again, and I don't disagree with you.
Since I was a kid.
What does that mean? You tell me what you mean by developmentally consistent.
All right, I think we'll give ourselves 45 seconds more here.
Yeah, we're waiting for Catherine.
Yeah.
first grade.
Like, what does that mean? What the standards say? Because I'm gonna tell you that they're not.
Okay.
They tell children in kindergarten and first grade.
This is coming, but they, you know,
Have to
until
write
you
it, you can draw it.
really start to
Yeah.
sit with it.
Or
it's
take
hard
it
to-
in one way or another.
No, it's
In fact, not only do you have to draw it, or you have to write it, you can also tell it. Another person can write it if you don't know how to write it.
true, you can
I'm
do
saying,
that.
like, there are some things in there that are,
I tell you a story. I was a coach of appropriately little
it's a totally,
when I was a kid, I used to have to run the bases with age 5. My kids were the test kids.
yeah, but yes, you're right. But we're like,
Function by high school.
That's a great listen to me. I can listen as a rec coach.
Just couldn't do it then.
I had these girls spinning around in the field in softball, no idea what they're doing out there. Now they're on national ranked teams.
I tell them to do their job.
So if I had given up on her, so
But
Yeah.
so I ran the bases with her. She was
Freddie,
fine.
when I give you,
Maybe
And
we shouldn't
that's
be having
why-
sports at 5. You know, I mean,
Well,
that's-
right, that
and
raises,
there-
well, that raises the other
But
question,
you know,
right?
then we want to have Scoopy soccer at 3.
This expert from the end of the day.
And I was, we have to make that.
Right.
Where they only play with just kicking the ball. There's no score, there's no goals, there's no nothing.
because it's not about
They're
things,
just running around with the ball.
things to put into play,
That's, you know, I don't know.
or to put into
Kids
play.
develop over time, and I want to be careful.
Marked, measurable. And that can take the shape of anything.
I don't know that we will do any better
You expect.
than what we're doing now, but we want to be more purposeful. We measure it through a lens, but
But I even think that would be better understood by doing this, because you'll say this is why.
Because we
yeah,
have to,
yeah, I agree.
you know that, you don't know that.
All right, I saw Catherine go by. I think we're gonna have to move on here, though, because it's, we've
Yep.
spent seven minutes here, so. Catherine, if you can hear me, we're about to
I
start.
think she just went on the phone.
Oh,
2 years.
all right, we're gonna start.
She took her.
All right, I'm going to go fairly quickly, if I can. So we're talking about our capital project planning and what we've been doing to date. And so I'll talk about tonight why we want to do it now, the project timeline a little bit, what the Buildings and Grounds Committee has done so far and is continuing to do. I'll talk a little bit about our capital project planning committee that we've formed and the work they've done, who they are and who our strategic partners are. And I'll talk a little about the process, and then I'll get into a little bit about the scope of work that we've identified so far, and then finally the next steps. So why a capital project now? And, we have really needs. We've been identifying some of these needs for several years now. I'm jumping into this in my second year, but I know a lot of this has existed. Our last project only went so far, and our budget only goes so far. There's only so much you can put into a budget in terms of dollars, and the rest has to really come outside of that when it's a larger project. And these are just some of the areas that we've talked about in terms of what we need: our aging infrastructure, safety and security, HVAC needs, improving our academic spaces, and I'm going to get into this in more detail, paving and addressing storage. And those were the main themes that we kind of came to. Why now also? In a couple of, I look at the debt schedule that we have, and I'm trying to make this what I would say is tax neutral. So by that, I mean not increasing our, what the general fund would have to pay on a principal and interest. So we want to keep that in the sense that we're not increasing the budget or having to go outside of that. So we're looking at, in a couple of years, our debt payments would drop by about 1.2 million. That's what we pay on an average year principal and interest. It'll go down by that much. So I could pick up that same amount and not change our budget, not change our general fund budget. So that concept is important. I mean, obviously, we could always choose to go above that amount and increase our general fund budget. But again, with the tax cap, we have to be concerned about that. So if we were to do that, we could always do that. We just have to be mindful. Right now, borrowing costs are still relatively low. I'm a little concerned that they're starting to go up, and I'll have to keep, mindful of that. Right now, they just raised the federal funds rate again by another 25 basis points, and I think there's still going to be at least one more this year. So while it helps us on interest income, it doesn't help us on the debt side. So we got to keep, before it gets really out of hand, then we want to lock in at some point. The K through 12 survey that we did, the Insight survey, we did ask the public about capital projects. And it was interesting that it was very consistent over the survey in terms of pretty much everybody obviously said safety and security first. Most everybody did talk about repairing and upgrade facilities, and I was heartened to hear that because I was afraid that might be on the bottom and people wouldn't think that was important. So I'm glad that they understand that we do need to invest in our facilities. Modern and flexible learning spaces really came in third. Students flip-flop that with the repair and upgrade facilities. And sustainability and energy efficiency came in fourth, and then athletic facilities. But I think that was because we've really just invested in our athletic facilities, so I'm not really surprised by that.
And I would say with the 2014 capital bond, there was also a lot in terms of energy efficiency.
There was quite a bit there. We worked on the vestibules. We added the middle school vestibules, which helped that school. We put univents in at Dowd Lane. We put LED lighting in certain places, so we did invest in that.
How nice does our children care more about sustainability and energy efficiency than athletic fields?
Yes.
That's nice.
No, they don't.
Opposite,
No, they don't.
Oh, no.
Give us the data.
Usually 5 is most, isn't it?
No.
Hey, we just learned we have to be careful with data around Dave.
Yeah.
So, they see a ball and they go for that, okay. As you can tell by the courtyard, how much they use it, actually.
5 is the lead.
As far as a project timeline, there's really two sections that it is. One is leading up to a vote, and then one's after the vote. And leading up to the vote, there's still quite a lot you have to do in terms of what's going on. And, we've talked a little bit more in detail about what we've been doing in May and June, the scope of this presentation. But then what we really have to do is and I'll kind of talk to this at the end as well, so I almost debated whether I should put this here at the end. But it is a long process. And once we finalize our scope, which hopefully we're going to do by the end of the summer, we really need to do this by the end of the summer, because then, in order for the board to put a resolution up, you have to go through the SECR process, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And that, if we're going to be moving dirt in any way, shape, or form, that could take 3 months. It might take less, it might take more. It's one of those things, but until we have that SECR authorization, you're not going to even be able to put a resolution up for the community to vote. And then there's also, determining when the vote can happen. You have legal notices and everything else, so there's a timeline behind that. So there's a timeline behind everything here. So we really can't afford to slack off on this. That's just why this is I'm doing this today, and we're moving forward. But once we do have a vote,
So it looks like we can already slot in our August 21st meeting for,
we're going to need to have this discussion now. We have to do some work ahead of that, so we'll have to see where we are with the architect, but you can try to slate something in for that date, yes. After the vote, then the architect firm will prepare the actual construction documents. And that isn't just a simple, let's, go in and make these documents based on the scope. That's where the real work begins of getting into the nitty-gritty. So when we present the scope to the community, we're saying we're going to improve this space, we're going to do this, and we have some preliminary sketches. But the architect is not really allowed to do the detailed drawing, and we're not allowed to spend money for the architect to do that until the community has voted. So there's a bit of a catch-22 here. And then they need time to go in and interview teachers and really look at the space and do every little measurement and all that to make the construction drawings. So once they get those construction drawings and have done the extra work on that, then they go up to the state education department. There right now is about a 36-week review time for engineering, anything that involves engineering. It fluctuates. Sometimes the lead time is more for architecture, sometimes it's more for engineering, sometimes it's more for different things. The state is addressing it. They're adding people. They have a fast-track review process now, which some districts are testing the water on, and I'm listening carefully to it and about it. But, and we're not even there yet, so we'll see what that timeline is in next spring. But by next spring, we should have something to go for them. And the other key piece of this is when you want to have your bidding happen. So really, we're shooting for a November timeframe to have bids done. Anytime you start to go too much later than that, the bid prices will go up, because all of the construction firms will have enough work for that summer, and they won't need it, because all of the work happens in the summer. So, they're going to be bid out, so we have to be on the early side. So no matter how we time this, we're going to want to time our bids to be in a November, December timeframe.
so you're saying rush, and by the time you start construction, I'll be done with my term.
Well, we'll have to have you rerun, I guess. So now, that said, though, look at the last piece of it, Michael. So some smaller projects could begin sooner. So not everything has a long review time, and not everything needs is detailed drawing. So, for example, a roof is a shorter review time. It may take only 9 to 11 weeks right now for roofing.
Okay.
That's a straightforward project. They just knocked that one out of the park. They know how to do that. And we could bid that out and get that done. So there are pieces we could bring out. Some of the security pieces, like with the phone systems and the smart card things that we will propose, that might be expedited and get done sooner. So there will be some things we can done. Anything major that we're doing, anything like really redesigning, no, that's gonna take a while. And it's important that the community understands that, because you can't just snap your fingers and do this. As much as we want to, it doesn't really work that way, and I need to make that point pretty clear. What has the Buildings and Grounds Group Committee done so far? So they've been hard at work this year. I have to say, we've met every month and sometimes twice a month. We've interviewed architects, and we selected architect, which we had discussed at a previous board meeting, H2M, and I'm gonna go through them in a little future slide. We hired a construction management firm. We formed that larger planning committee. We've been reviewing the building condition surveys and all the facility plans to go through our initial scope of work. And then we kind of found 3 themes, which was really academic student staff needs, including storage, facility maintenance infrastructure, including energy efficiency, HVAC needs, and paving and sidewalk needs. And then the last one, which is really probably one of the more key ones, as you saw from the survey, is the safety and security needs. So we've kind of put it into 3 different areas. And then finally, at this one they have not done yet, the last one, but they're going to have to take the scope and the work of the Capital Project Planning Committee and now make recommendations to the full board. What we're going to need to do that, though, is the cost information that the construction management and the architect is working on. So that's the final piece at this point. But so who is on this committee, and what is this committee? So the committee is really an advisory committee that we formed to help really take the initial list and work on it some more. They are stakeholders in this process. We're going to talk a little about exactly who they are in a second. And we've asked them to contribute to the list of the needs. So that was what we charged with them. We asked them to evaluate and assist us in prioritizing it. So we did a lot of that, and I'm going to get, again, into a little bit more specifics on that. The committee was made up of the Buildings and Grounds Committee of the board, the administration, including almost all the principals, Gary as the Director of Facilities. The 3 of us were involved with it. We had IFA representation, we had CSEA representation, and then we had about 6 community members, including the PTSA. So we did have, and then we represented every school in that process. And then also we had our strategic partners, which are the architecture firm, and I just put this up so the community can see this, but we've already gone through this in terms of H2M and who they work with. They basically exclusively work with school districts. At least this particular office is only working with school districts. We were very impressed with some of the drawings that they had done and some of their work. And they also have engineering divisions, so that they're kind of a fully integrated firm. They do a lot of their own things, so we're not having to rely on subcontractors. Some architect firms, they just do drawings, and they don't worry about the rest of it. And I think that was kind of important to our committee process, was to have a firm that was very integrated. We've also hired a construction management firm. Their name is Triton. They basically are the boots on the ground once you start the construction, but the step that a lot of school districts miss is that they don't hire them soon enough. They are instrumental in getting cost information to us, because they are the ones who go out and get bidders to come. They attend all the bid openings. They know what the prices are, and then they'll actually rustle up bidders and really wrangle that. So they are very important in this process, and they work very well with the architects. So ultimately, that will save us money. The good news for us is that the way they bid it and the way we ask for it is that we don't have to pay them for this part of the process. We only pay them when they start working on the actual construction. And if the vote were to go down, we don't end up having to pay them. That's the risk they've taken in doing that. If the vote goes up and then we decide not to use them and we cut them, then we would have to reimburse them for some of their services and their time. So, but I think so far everyone's been happy with the input they've had at the table in the discussions. And then finally, we've had 2 other, experts at our tables, and I'll talk more about the tables in a minute, but we've had a new security consultant, which is John LaPlaca from Altaris, and he's been joining us on the security discussions. And also Edutech has been in the process, because, again, when we're talking about wiring and cameras and can our infrastructure talk about it, everything now today is so technology integrated that we need them in the room for this. So our timing has been pretty good with the security assessment, and all of that plays together. So it's kind of exciting to see this all come together, but it's also a bit overwhelming at times. So But, you know, with the vestibules and the phones and the cameras, we need these experts, because honestly, I'm not an expert in that. So as part of the committee process, we took the larger committee and we said, okay, this is gonna be a little unwieldy to try to work up this entire scope with all of this. So we split up into 3 groups by those major areas that I talked about before. And then we really got to work. We looked at all of the scope that we had identified through the buildings and grounds. We took into consideration the board survey on the security concerns and also the staff concerns on the security. We actually did something that I stole from the schools, and we used Google Docs and Chromebooks. So we actually had the Chromebook cart here, and we set up in 3 different tables, and everybody had a Chromebook, and we set up a doc for each group, and people were typing in. And what was interesting is it was sort of like almost from my end of being lazy, that if we had put stuff on flip charts, I was going to be typing it all up. But what really is interesting is that you could all be contributing at the same time. So someone was talking, you were typing what your thoughts were right into the document, and then people would feed off each other, and everybody had a chance to participate. So I really thought it worked very well. I was very pleased with that, and I have become a new Google Doc proponent, right? It took Raina to check, can you do that in Google Docs? Can you please put that in Google Docs? Finally, I'm embracing that technology. So, and I just think it allowed everybody to share. So it was really good. And I now have some very comprehensive notes that I'm combining into one document from the 3. We asked for more details. We had a column for more details on the different things. We had asked for implications, for challenges, and any notes and questions that anyone had, so we could follow up on it. People were even putting links in the document to specs that they had seen, or an article.
Or videos
Videos about how students move around the quad. So it's really a very comprehensive document, and I now have to kind of just work on it to make it one comprehensive document. There is a lot of overlap, I should have said this before, so under safety and security and student needs, and even infrastructure about safety, there's overlap. So some things are in 3 different places now, and I will call that out. So that's what I'll be working on. So just a lot of great thoughts happened during the process, great questions. We took field trips. A whole table would get up and go somewhere, and they would go look at something. You know, look at the atrium, look at the quad, go look at areas. So we were really, I would say, busy. The three meetings that we really were working in the tables, we just really worked. I mean, I have to say. So what did we actually accomplish? Oh, and H2M and Triton were present during these meetings, so they were guiding us. There was one architect from each from the firm at each table. Triton sat at the facilities infrastructure table, because that's probably their biggest expertise. We had the security and EdTech at the safety one, and then I had the architect at the academic one. So we really had a split up pretty well. And at the end, everybody presented back to the full committee. So there was a period of time for questions from everybody. So I just think it was a good process. So what did we actually talk about? And I'm going to go through these quickly because there's a lot to digest here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that we have on our list at the moment. Some of the things, you know, are on the list, and we may still be attacking them through the budget, through our normal budget, because we do have some of these things on our summer project list or in our budget this year. But we kept them here because sometimes when we put them in the budget and we think we're going to get them done, and then a quote comes in and we can't, I don't want to lose sight of them on this list. So they may be in both places. But so you may have seen something in a budget presentation. But under safety and security, the biggest idea obviously is to add a wall or add walls and somehow enclose the quad area and the campus. The architect has some preliminary ideas, and that's what they're sketching out right now for us. And then we'll be putting some cost to that. But you know, how do we keep it that same open environment but still close it and secure it? And that is probably the biggest piece of this project. We talked a lot about vestibules and creating that separate entry point where someone would come in and then they can be buzzed in. So they would come into a lobby, then they would be buzzed in. So they're not just coming right in as we are doing at the Margem entrance right now. So similar to what we're doing more at Main Street, but you know, where we're actually seeing somebody through a camera and then saying, oh yeah, we want to let them in. And then there's other pieces to that the security consultant has weighed in on. Adding cameras everywhere and trying to figure out the best way to do this and where they can be. But again, to try to do it now and too soon without really having a plan is not advisable. We talked a lot about the swipe card door entry system. both for exterior doors and interior doors and how that would look, and other schools are doing on that. A visitor ID system, it was probably something that's going to happen sooner, and I'll get into that later, but that's just another way of checking visitors, and that's really not that costly. It probably will come out of this project and go into something that we can do this year. Continuing on, we want to improve our lighting with different fixtures, continuing on the LED theme, but more from a security point of view, both from a security point of view and an energy efficiency point of view. So we'll have both, it'll be on both lists, basically. We have, now this would be, might consider this facility infrastructure, but radiator covers on exposed radiator piping. You know, that could be a safety issue if a student, you know, sits too close to something and gets overheated or potentially even burned. We have never had that. We've always done our furniture carefully, and teachers are aware of these things, but still it's something we need to address. We have a coal chute that just has no purpose, and that space could either be used, and it should just be removed at this point. The shade panels in the high school are failing and could actually fall, and that happened in Port Chester, and then they had to do an emergency spending bill to get that fixed. So we're trying to stay on top of that. I think that was a very popular thing that was built that way in whatever year our school was built, but it has to be improved. We've talked a lot about safety bollards, adding them. We have some money in our budget to do it this year, and we're going to be looking at placement, but we wanted to make sure that's on our list. And then we talked a lot about hallway control. So when you are doing a major event, do you have to let the whole school be open, or can only part of it be open when you're doing a night event and things like that? So, but we have to be very mindful of fire code when we do this. And then one of the other things that is a fairly new idea is the safety film that you can put on windows. It's not bulletproof, but it can definitely delay.
It reduces the shatter
It reduces the shatter, and it can delay the entry of danger. So bulletproof glass is prohibitively expensive. We are talking about some of the things we're doing now for some of the bigger areas that are quite wide open. From an academic, student, and staff point of view, we really have a need to create flexible learning spaces to be able to, to Raina's work and what the teachers are doing to change our space. Kids are learning differently now, and we need to work with that. So the classroom, we can use our classrooms, but we have to be able to think about how to configure them differently and create some new spaces. So that's going to be a challenge for us, because physically we're out of space to a lot of degrees. So it's something the architects have a lot of ideas on, and we're going to be talking a lot more about that. Adding functioning kitchens at Main Street School, it probably, it's going to stay a lower priority just because we don't know where we would find the space to do that, short of adding outside the building, and I don't know how feasible that would be.
Kitchen is in kitchen.
There is no kitchen there. There's really,
Correct.
yeah, it's a satellite operation. But we keep it on the list because, we don't know what the architect is going to come up with ideas for this. This is why we hire them, so we're keeping things on the list. Whether or not it makes the final cut or not, I don't know. Outdoor bathrooms is a true need. We're especially as we're trying to lock buildings now and not let people in after hours. So, how do we address this situation? And there's a lot of ideas on that. Classroom casework, even today I was looking again down the art room because I get particularly, concerned, I should say is the word, when we're storing things and it could be fire issues and we're not really meeting code sometimes because we just have, classrooms that need better storage. Art is one of them, music is one of them for sure. And probably some of our other classrooms too. The casework just means how the shelving and cabinetry, it's a fancy word for that, but how you set up a classroom to allow for storage and student learning and do both. Our phone system is completely out of date. You've heard me talk about this at our budget meetings, and it has to be done. So it's a big expense. And short of we can go out and lease for this, and if we have to, we will. But if we can get this done, and that would be one of those things we could do sooner rather than waiting till 2020. But it's something we have to integrate. And then the PA system that can be incorporated into a phone system. Because right now our PA system is good, but it has areas where it's not good. So it's not completely clear in every area. Enhancing the upper quad area, how can we utilize that space for learning and for students to congregate, collaborate, and all the great things that they're doing. The bleachers right now already, we know we're not really in compliance with those. We have to upgrade them. We're going to try to work on making them, more compliant short term, but how can we maybe combine that with a different press box, locate them differently, and just make some improvements. So that would be the one athletic piece that the students might get, because that's a need there. We have, from our last capital project, one that couldn't get done because bid prices were more, which is the girls' bathrooms at the high school. We talked about redesigning and improving the cafeteria. So here's another situation where there's nothing really wrong with the cafeteria. However, it's not really conducive to how kids want to be in the cafeteria. And a lot of schools have done some really amazing work, and it doesn't cost all that much to re-energize that cafeteria and create better space. And also think about how students are in terms of charging devices and being allowed to charge their phones and having places for them to do that. So while they're at lunch and then using that space also for student learning and the hours that they're not being used for food service. Redesigning this media center is on this list. You know, how can we use this space better? There's a lot of ideas for that. Creating, more collaborative spaces, quiet study spaces, maybe even classroom spaces here. The faculty lounge is in a pretty bad location, and how can we maybe regenerate or reuse that or put it somewhere else, and that's on the list. The locker rooms at Mar Gym are not really that useful, I'm being told, so how do we fix that and make them more modern and more usable, and then potentially make that a little easier so the high school kids are using the Mar Gym and maybe the middle school kids are using the TG Gym, so there's less movement of students from a security point of view. That would be something, a consideration. And then the carpet really does need to be replaced in the theater. That's a pretty big expense for our budget. We will be considering some of these things in our budget that are standalone like that, but I leave it on the list because if we can't do it through the budget, it should stay on this list as a need. Then we have what I would call storage and protection of resources. So we don't have any building, a maintenance building that we can use to house our district vehicles, equipment, plows. We can't perform repairs on them. We have to either send it out or we're doing this outside in the cold in the middle of the winter. Even to attach plows, we're doing this. It's not that easy to just attach the plow, and we're doing it, with no gloves on in 0-degree weather sometimes. So that's difficult. Plus, our equipment doesn't last when you don't store it properly. We have a very low shelf life for a truck, which shouldn't happen. You should be able to have a much longer useful life of something. A storage shed also. We're not storing our athletic equipment. We're leaving most of it outside. We had to shrink wrap those new mats. We have other equipment. I mean, that's just not a big enough space over here in that green area there, so to put stuff. What am I up to? And then I already talked about the classroom casework. Let's see. So roofing, we have minimal roofing needs. The biggest is really at Dow's Lane. We have a situation over the library there where that's leaking, and it's been patched numerous times. So that is an old roof. It's over 25 years old. So that really needs to stay on the list. The rest would be more panel repair and changing our gutters so that our water is directed away from the buildings and not, really coming down streaming. So there's some gutter work we need. Some of that we may be able to do, again, through the budget. Electrical, we're going to attempt this summer to replace the electrical lines at the transformer at Dow's. That's that one area where we had sparking issues. That if it comes in with a reasonable quote, we're going to be doing that. It's a safety need. We kind of need to do it now, so we did budget the money for that. But again, just in case, I have it on the list. Moving the electrical service underground at Eastfield is probably too large an undertaking, but we keep it on the list because it would save us money in the long run, because every time the power goes out, we own that repair, and we've spent a lot of money doing that over the past couple of years. Replacing exterior doors, we have a couple that we're doing in the budget this year, but we won't be able to get to all of them in our budget. They're, again, frightfully expensive to do these exterior doors, but they're failing. Replace the ollie track fencing. Again, at some point, we might be able to put that in, but if not, we'd like to consider that. The TG theater gym building, the locker rooms, the tiles are always being damaged. We can't put cameras in there because it's a locker room. We're thinking of, one of the groups actually talked about maybe leaving it more open and maybe more of that warehouse look in there. But we have to consider fire code and what's the code for that. So that the architect had some interesting ideas for that. So we have kind of we took that out of the budget, and I misspoke to the Buildings and Grounds Committee the other day. I thought I said that was in our summer projects, but it's not. So the window well railings and footings at Main Street School, right now, a student could, the foundation is cracked. You can see it in that bottom picture a little bit. Foundations are cracked, and that green fence is a little bit wobbly. So if somebody really were to push against that, there's potential for that to go. So we are gonna try to address that this summer. It is on our summer project list. If the quotes come in reasonable, we're going to be doing that project. So, but I leave on the list just in case. And then there's a couple of larger floor abatement projects that we are well outside of our scope of a budgetary project. And one of them is the Dallas Gym, and some of them are at Main Street School for the most part, where you can only put, since they are capped right now, there's no safety issue, but if you try to abate these, if you try to do anything with these floors, you're gonna run into environmental issues that we really need to address. So that's a dollar amount that's gonna be way outside of our budget. But we need to deal with them. Energy efficiency, we have a boiler at Dow's Lane that is basically starting to fail. We keep replacing different sections of it. We've been advised that its useful life is almost over. And we really don't want to have a problem in the middle of winter in that school, so we need to address this one. The unit vents we did at Dow's Lane, but we need to do it at the high school. They are also very old now. We need to make sure our air is good. I could send you countless articles about the importance of good air on learning, but, and I'll just jump to air conditioning for classrooms. It was just an article in that the National Bureau of Economic Research put out about how as temps rise and schools don't have air conditioning, test scores drop. And they did all this research about it, and so that document is actually in the Google Doc right now, so.
So can that be paid by the professional development budget?
So to Raina's point on test scores, we may have to factor that in our test score analysis. I was sitting there listening to your conversation going, I'm gonna have to make sure I say that, because it's part of the whole conversation, on learning. So lighting was on the safety list. It's also on the HVAC and energy efficiency list, because they've made some huge improvements in LED lighting. It will actually save us money, and it's better lighting. I think everybody was pleased with the gyms in Main Street School in Dallas and in the high school where we put that new lighting in, so.
I miss those old green photos from the Main Street School
Yeah.
gym.
Okay. Window replacements, luckily, we don't have to do too many. We're not so bad with windows. For the most part, we're talking about that safety film more, but there are a couple places where the windows have failed. And the building maintenance system controls, that's like basically how you access heating and air conditioning controls. And if you put the right systems in, you can do this from the internet and at your home on a weekend. You get alerts to know that you have a problem. If this room is too hot or too cold, I could just text, Richie, and he would be able to fix it right from his house. So, assuming he was home. But I would have a list of where to go, and it's something that we are behind the times on. We don't really have this. We have a minor system, but it's not up to date. And finally, so the group talked about solar panels. That one's going to be a tough one because you need good roofs for that, and you need young roofs for that. So we don't have a lot of young roofs. So it might not be something that's feasible, but it's something that always leave in the discussion because we really don't know what's happening in terms of solar, and I'm curious to see what the architects come back with on any of that. And then we have a lot of paving, and last but not least, really, but we have a lot of paving and sidewalk needs. We talked a lot about traffic flow and parking and how that affects the high school and our whole experience, and whether or not there's anything we can do. And the architects have some ideas they might present to us, but it really is a big nut here to crack. And the group talked about, could we put a garage, a parking garage in the campus parking lot and have 2 levels? Could we do that somewhere else? And you know what? It's not the worst idea. It's just a matter of how would that look and how could we make it, pretty. But if we're going to start digging to go underground, then that would be, a little bit more enhanced. If we just do it where we have now, we still got neighbors to consider. Again, lots of considerations.
Put some tennis courts on top of them.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So, but what can we do now? We also talked about what can we actually do physically now. We talked about the timeline and not having to wait. But we did budget some money for security, and since this is the biggest concern, I might as well update you on this in terms of what are we planning on doing now with some of the budgeted money. And, we talked about a visitor management system, and we'll be talking about changing our visitor protocols. We're in the process of working on that now, requiring visitor lanyards, just tightening up the whole process for this. So that will be something that we're working on and we'll be proposing shortly and how we go about that. I'm looking at about 4 different vendors for the visitor management system. And then we've been looking at best practices for the sign-in system. This was an interesting one from our consultant, numbering all of our windows and doors. So, you know, this room doesn't have any windows and doors, so it's hard to apply. But if I were, like I was just thinking of sitting in the district office conference room, and I tell the police or the, you know, SWAT team that I have a problem and I'm in this room, they need to be able to know from the outside where I am. So if that is room 5, I would number the window, like in the sense that that door was a window and this door was a window. I would number each of them 5, so they would know from this spot to this spot is that room inside. So that when they're looking at it from outside, they would know where you are inside and can help you. So we're going to be tackling that this summer, actually. We're going to be working to do that. I'm going to try to do it as, I don't want to say pretty, as, you know, to minimize it being ugly.
Marker.
But, you know, as possible, but there are going to be some concerns about readability and so that, and that was something that would have never even occurred to me, but our security consultant said, do that now, that's something you can just go ahead and do. Flip charts are something we can buy, they're not that expensive. We're going to be putting one in every class or every room where we would have a major gathering and a staff member would need to know quickly the procedures. So while they're all trained in the heat of a battle sometimes to say, oh, I got to do this, 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 and this. And it gives them a little bit of peace of mind to know I have that resource. You know, we always talk about how expensive radios are, but they have come down, and our vendor has said, our consultant has said, you don't have to have top-of-the-line radios. You know, maybe for the ones that you use every day, for the bus traffic, those people do. But for everybody else, if you're just talking for your safety team, this radio will do. So where we were thinking more money, that he's thinking you can do this less. So this is why, again, where the consultants really, truly help us. We are looking at adding some cameras in some of the key locations, assuming our existing wiring can support that. This one, the last one here, installing a proximity door reader is really access control on the exterior doors. So this would be something we're working on pricing it out, whether or not it would be feasible with the money we have in our budget. So it would be for our major exterior doors, and it would be kind of a swipe system. So it's just for the exterior doors, and then we can keep doors locked. You know, we really can keep doors locked, and there would be no excuse to leave them open. And then the system would also say, okay, between period 1 and period 2, when the kids are changing classes, the doors would unlock, because it could be programmed to do that. And then after the kids have moved, the doors would lock again. It also would have a thing so we would know the door is unlocked. So, and in a lockdown, it would just immediately lock, and none of your passes would even work. So, except for certain people that maybe could override it, I don't know. That's why we're still learning about it. But it's something that we think we might be able to do with the money on a short-term basis. And then the last thing is very inexpensive, is just making sure our kits are completely up to snuff. So we might need to spend a little money to make that happen. So he was impressed that we had them, and that we actually did have them. Some schools don't even have them when they look for them. But
The to-go bags you're
these are
referring to?
to-go bags, and in certain rooms to have basically safety bags, yep, for evacuation and things like that. So that's basically where we're at. So next steps, we have the architect working on concept sketches right now. Construction management will be adding costs to that scope of work list. We'll be looking to prioritize it. The Capital Projects Planning Committee did add their ideas of what priorities are. Basically 1, 2, and 3, highest, medium, and low, but nothing was low, unfortunately. I mean, some things were lower, but really nothing, I want to say nothing is low. It was highest, less highest, and, you know, still high, because that's how they kind of put everything. Nobody really wanted to admit anything was low, so I hate to say it that way, but, and then we'll be looking to make final recommendations to the board for our final scope of work. And when I say final scope of work, again, it's not a be-all, end-all, we're going to actually do this, 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 and this. It's to say we need to create flexible spaces, so when we put the proposition up, the community knows what they're voting on. It does not have to be as detailed as you're going to, you know, turn this particular one room, and this is how it's going to look. It's conceptual still. It does not have to be that detailed. So we don't want to get too bogged down on it, but we do need to tell them what they are voting on. So we also still need to host community forums and make sure we're updating the larger community. But this is one of the community forums that people can, you know, go into video, but we'll publish it more and we'll have more of a different presentation. And finally, I just want to say that, you know, this has been a very collaborative process. It requires a lot of time and commitment, both from the Buildings and Grounds Committee and the community members who came, the teachers who came after school, the CSEA people who came. So I really do want to say thank you to all of the people that were on the committee and everybody who's been involved so far to help guide us on what's going on.
Great,
I'd be happy to take any questions.
thank you. Looking way down there, Maura, would you have any questions that, or you want to think about it a moment?
CPR, unit for the CPR. CPR is this room, correct?
This is the, yeah, so this
Or
room
CPR, yeah.
is tied to the air conditioning in the library, so, but sometimes we're using this room and we're not using that room, so why are we air conditioning that room? So again, that's an energy efficiency system, so we're trying to create those, you know, because I look at that, if we were to air condition the school, that might be a great thing for test scores, but I also have to worry about the bill on that, the energy bill, so those are considerations, but things can be minimized if you zone properly, so when are you using it? You know, can you zone a classroom so it's used when the kids are in the classroom and not when they're not? Thank you.
All right,
I got nothing.
all right.
I just push on the camera issue. I'm not really sure what's takes so long. But
Yeah.
I don't think it needs to take that long. I just put 13 cameras in my school in 4 months. Granted, I had to do the bleed work to plot it out, but really you just got to put out a piece of paper and this is where I want the cameras.
And did you
You know, and
go
it's,
to a vendor for those cameras, or?
I had to use the NY, it's a long process in the city with the NYPD and the whole thing, but the moral of the story is it should have taken longer, but it didn't, is the point. And like, I just think it's based on the data, and it's a priority to have cameras.
Okay.
I think
Right, in this day and age, you'd hope that there would be some expediting.
Yeah, I just can't imagine it that hard.
Well, we just, you know, did significant work on upgrading our Wi-Fi, and I think that will help now.
Yeah.
I think up until this point, we didn't have enough Wi-Fi to really do the cameras. We barely had enough Wi-Fi to help with the education of the kids. So
Yeah.
I think now that we have that, and now we're upgrading our bandwidth on
Over the summer?
over the internet. So we just actually, just aside, through E-rate, we were able to, we bid out our light path, our internet, and we actually were able to get a better bandwidth for less money than we got
Okay, that
previously.
works.
So that's going to help us, and then that'll help us with the cameras as well, so.
So let your high schoolers know that they'll have Wi-Fi everywhere when they come back in September.
Yeah, Fortnite, exactly.
Yeah, for Fortnite, exactly. I'm sure that's not blocked.
I have no comments, I just want to make one point that the professionals whom we've hired have openly commented this is the most organized approach to getting a bond vote, and commended Carol on all her work and preparation for the meeting, and it really has been extraordinary to see how much thought you put into this, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we have the buildings and ground committee list?
Some of your final questions right now, feeling a little emotional about it.
So, I'm emotional about these things. So I second what Deb said. You know, having been on one of the committees and one of the groups, I mean, you made it as painless as it could possibly be, given how painful sometimes those committees can be, but you were very organized, and we had a curfew, you know, we had an hour, and we were all, you know, go, and it was just, it was great. You know,
Maureen
it was-
got all the snacks, by the way.
And the snacks helped too, right, exactly. But as Deb said, there was amazing amount of forethought that went into making it as efficient and painless as possible. So thank you for that. I did have one question about locking in the rate. At what point in the process are we able to lock in a rate? Because obviously, as you said, the Fed is starting to raise rates. And
Yeah,
is it with the vote? Is it after the, you know, when can we?
Once we vote, and, you know, that's a good question. I'm going to have to follow up on exactly that. But you can start to look at when you would want to borrow. We might have to have had at least something bid out before we can do it. We might have to have one or two things that we're going to actually pay for so that before we can borrow. I have to look back on that. Typically, you use bands until you want to borrow, but then you're not locking in the rate.
Right.
Right.
And then if you borrow too soon, though, you have arbitrage, issues where, and that's if you then take the money and invest it and earn more, and then you may have to pay the IRS back, because you're borrowing money to just invest it. So there are some rules, and I'd have to get back to you on that one. But I will be paying attention to all that. And we do have, you'll see it on our reorg meeting, our capital market advisors is our firm that advises on all this. They do all the projections for us, and they will be guiding us through the legal, and then we'll have bond counsel, which is Hawkins, Delafield, and something else in their last 3 names, and they will be guiding us as well. So I won't be getting us into trouble with it, but I will also be watching that carefully. Okay.
Ms. Kashkin?
No?
All right. I have a few questions. So first of all, I'm thinking about Catherine here. With the possible new press box and bleachers, was there any discussion about a space for food and spiritware sales as well? Because right now, students have to, and people have to cross the street to go to the tables versus maybe staying closer to and not having to cross the street.
Yeah, I mean, if we were putting a press box, the idea would be to combine it maybe with a bathroom, a concession thing.
So concessions are
and storage.
We're discussing that? Okay.
Yep, concessions, storage, bathrooms, we're all put kind of in that concept.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't see
And
concessions, so it sounds like that's part of
Potentially,
it.
depending on how high we could go with this, and, maybe, like a rooftop kind of room.
Yeah,
but
we got
that's
the
what you
Hudson River
propose.
right there.
Right, but, again, cost is gonna be a factor, because then we're building a brand-new building, but, like, depending on how, what they sketch out, there's a lot we could do. We could,
I like
it's just
that
a matter
thinking.
of how much we'll be able to do, so.
And to that point, one of the things the PTSA was hoping was to use the little house for
Yeah,
school store and spiritware.
They can bring it up behind Dow's Lane and knock down the trailer.
Well, they can travel from,
It's
building to
not,
building,
it's not,
basically.
I'm gonna just caution, it's not something that will travel a lot well. So we're gonna have to kind of find a place for it at some point, because it's hard to move that thing around. So I think we're gonna need to find a home, but my own personal opinion, I'll get advice on that, but it's difficult to move. It's
Well-
gotten rather large.
I guess the net message is we're looking for some place to house a school store.
Right.
And whether that's, in the library area or someplace else.
I'm
Science
kind of
wing.
curious now what the architect is gonna come back with, because they kind of heard that whole idea about improving that area. And, putting the bleachers maybe on one side with it one big press box and making it one area, and then the other side, maybe not having
It's a
anything.
beautiful open view.
So
and
you had the open view.
Yep, that would be great. I like that. And I've fallen a little behind on the state of the theater, but when I looked at it a while back, I think there were some updates last summer. But did you talk to someone about the theater? I know there was the carpet, but in terms of, does it have storage needs? Is
So the
it technology
theater does
upgrades?
have storage needs. There's really not a lot of places to put anything. They would love a place to build their sets and not have to take up the stage. We miss out on revenue because we can't rent that theater out, because
Yeah.
once the dramas go or the productions go, there's really no way for them to not put stuff up on the stage. In fact, we had a meeting today about, when we could rent it out, when we can't. We have proposals all the time, then we just can't honor them all because of the space.
Right.
So there's definitely some storage needs there, and the architects are aware of those limitations and what maybe they could propose in terms of where else we could put some storage for that.
Yeah.
And potentially even relocating the soundboard to do some different things there. We've talked about that.
No, that's one that it could, if you were able to start generating revenue, it could eventually start paying for itself.
It could if we did it right.
And then with environmental, I know you talked a little bit about solar, but did you talk to any environmental infrastructure, consultants that could help in terms of ideas? Because there's complicated, there's things like solar panels, but there may be simpler things like location of trees or painting the roofs or the wind technology,
So I think the architect will be putting some of that in play, because they are way more expert than us on that. A lot of companies will talk up environmental, EPC, energy performance contracts. I have mixed feelings about those. They say they pay them for themselves, but I'm not 100% convinced on them, but depending on the research. But we've done a lot of some of that stuff already in terms of light switches that go off. We've installed a lot of that, LED lighting. So we'll be looking at that, but yeah, there are definitely things we can do. But for every tree you plant, you have other issues, in terms of.
Yeah, I guess it's just if there's somebody that has that background, that point, that insight.
They definitely have that within their firm, and that's on their list. So.
It was number 4 on that feedback, but I'm sure people would be still interested that there's solutions out there. One piece that came back from the survey was the the student point of view, which is somewhat different than the grown-ups, and maybe in that next step to include student feedback loops to help inform your thinking and planning.
Innovative learning space.
Yeah, they may have some ideas. And then finally, with the summer projects, do you think you might be able to give us an update at our reorg meeting about
Sure.
progress?
Summer projects, what we do is we maintain a list of all the projects we're doing in the summer. Most of them were things that we presented in the budget document in terms of what we're doing. We are tackling a couple of the bigger things, and I'm hoping that we're waiting for quotes right now, that they're gonna come in reasonable and we can tackle them. So I mentioned them, the electrical line to the transformer, the window well replacement, and those are the bigger ones, and the other big one was replacing the TG exterior doors. Then there's a lot of other ones that are still kind of, doing restriping of the floors, different things. So all the things we normally do, but yes, I will make sure you have that.
Great, okay, thank you. All right. That was very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to develop that presentation.
You're welcome.
So next up, we have our consent agenda. There's a number of items on here, including the appointment of special education teacher, appointment of foreign language teacher, elementary teacher, new district clerk, and a big one in terms of food service. So can I get a motion to, what's the term? Accept our consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions about anything before we vote? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, and then I would like to thank, there are a few donations for scholarships to the Zachary Kamen Scholarship Fund and the Paul Schrader Scholarship and the PTSA for the high school sports award dinner, the Giving Trees, and that's about it. And then one other piece is, usually we have some discussion about the year-end fund balance. So in the consent agenda discusses that we'll be able to sign that money, but we will have an update or discussion about that when you've got a final audit for the year.
Right. It's a little premature to say that, but I'm confident that we'll be able to fund our unrestricted fund balance, the unassigned fund balance, two different words, but same thing. And so we'll be able to fund that to the recommended 4%.
Okay.
And then after that, we should have some to be able to put into the tax cert reserve, the workers' comp reserve, and the capital. I don't think I'll be adding any more to the employee benefit liability reserve, so I did not include that.
Okay.
I think that's sufficiently funded.
Right, gotcha.
So that will be something that we'll give you the details once we close the books.
Very good. And speaking of closing the books, our next meeting will be in the new academic year on Tuesday, July 2nd for our reorganization meeting. So we will be seeing each other for a retreat, I believe, before then, but our next meeting is in July. So with that, can I get a motion to adjourn our meeting? Oh, that's true. Did community, would you like to make any comment or ask any questions? All right. Thank you. Yeah, I mentioned that, but let me point out more explicitly. There was, thank you to Carol for leading the process. It was in terms of, we had an RFP and just approved a bid for food services, and that was a big process this year in which you elicited feedback in the form of a survey, speaking with students, including particularly from the Destination Imagination team
Wellness.
and the Wellness Committee. So,
Board input on that one, too.
so thank you to board members and community members and others who were involved. Do you want to speak to a couple of those?
Well, I would just say that we ended up with a pretty favorable bid, and I was pleasantly surprised because we did add some interesting requirements to the food service contract, in which I spoke about at the last meeting, but in May. But I was hopeful that it wasn't going to add too much to the cost, and we ended up with a pretty good bid. So we only had 2 bids, but they were competitive, and it was good. So we will be able to continue with a profitable program. I was a little bit nervous there, but so we're good.
Well, and And thank you for that effort. Really appreciated by the community. So with that, could I get a motion to?
One
You do,
question.
you got motivated.
Now, that's positivity.
I too, Carol, I want to say thank you for everything that you do with the capital projects, because it is impressive, and I can relate to what you do, so. I also wanted to just make one other point as it relates to the capital projects, and I am concerned that as I watch the inventory of real estate increase in our community, there's a pressure now on prices, so there's a good chance that we may have hit somewhat of a peak in our valuation, and if that's the case, that's going to have an impact on our budgets, not next year, but the following year. So as we think about the bond, that could be, and interest rates, there could be another stress on the budget, so I just want to say that. And then another thing is, you know, Yas and I are advocates for the early foreign language program. We know that there's a committee, and we noticed with the capital committee that there are community representatives on the committee, so we were hoping that perhaps there could also be community representatives on the early foreign language committee that's meeting. And I know, Rena, we've had some discussions, but I'll say it out there publicly. And I want to thank Catherine for all of her work, because just after going through the campaign, it's a lot of work that you guys do. I get it. And happy to see a brick. Total aside, I am co-chair of the brick drive, so if any of you want to buy a
Still need
brick.
that follow-up email yet again.
Yeah, I know, you bought one, I know, the check's in the mail. Anyone else, though, if you want to leave a legacy for your child who might be graduating, a memento for moving up, feel free to buy a brick, aren't they lovely?
Thank you. And
I
you're-
see Elizabeth Hargrave's class.
Exactly.
and
When they were selling?
and just in response to your question, tucked in the middle, I think you've gotten some response, but we'll follow up just to, you know, look into. I mean, I think there's a process in terms of one is a capital project, the other is you know, professional development of programs. So, but we'll have that conversation. So thank you. Yeah.
And if I can just say one thing, it's thanks for acknowledging Catherine too. It's late, it's 10:15, so I too want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure serving with you as a friend and as a colleague, and I think the hour of the day kind of speaks to how much work this is, so thank you for it.
Yeah, well, now you got a chain reaction.
But I know you want to say thank you, so let's do it.
No, I said thank you, Catherine. It's been a pleasure, it has been, it's been a pleasure working with you.
And it's late.
Thank
That's
you.
Did we vote yet? I lost track.
Not yet.
What are we
No.
voting on?
Stopping
to adjourn.
being here.
No, we didn't, Maria interrupted.
Did we get a
Kevin
motion?
interrupted you in community comment.
So
Wait,
moved.
But are we going to?
Doreen, did we do a motion yet?
No,
You started it and then
you
Deb
started.
said it.
Are we going to
so
executive
moved.
Catherine,
Are we?
it's all been moved.
I think it's pretty late. I think we got.
I second it.
All right. So
Do it. Okay. Aye.
we're gonna wrap it up. Okay.
That's it,
Yes.
Catherine, you're done.
Good.
Well, I think about vote on that one, so sure.
Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, David seconded. Who first did it?
You want to keep going?
Yeah, yeah, that's the best part.
You got your motions, right?
We're not going to executive?
No, that's, hold on.
And they made me another one.
That's one.
Oh, well, wasn't clear on that. I thought we were going to executive session.
Yes.
I have that.